I'm David Scandura.
I'm Justus Burkett.
And today we're here to find out, is Dune Part 1 the greatest movie ever made?
But Arrakis is Arrakis. And the desert takes the weak.
Welcome to the greatest movie ever made, the show where we watch a movie and tell you if it's the greatest movie ever made.
Bless the maker and his water. Bless the coming and going of him. May his passage cleanse the world. David's looking at me being like, are you going to do the whole thing? May he bless and keep the world for his people. That's not the whole thing. I didn't do it right. That's fine.
A movie that is so thoroughly entertaining and compelling that while you're watching it, it's the only thing that matters in the world. Good job, though.
Yeah.
You got most of it, I
It's
think.
just right off the dome. I didn't have it in front of me. Yeah.
I'm David Scandura, joined as always by my co-host and actor who is disappointed that he did not get a call back for his Baron Harkonnen audition, Justus Burkett.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, I do look like a Harkonnen in this movie because the creative choice that Villeneuve and the design team on this, the production team on this movie has made is that all the Harkonnens are bald. They seem to be completely hairless. Like none of them even have like eyebrows or facial hair or body hair of any kind. But it is the lack of head hair is of course the most striking, kind of immediate visual. So yeah, I feel like I'm a clear choice for a Harkonnen in these movies. I can get rid of all the other hair too. But I already shaved my head. Anyway, how are you doing, David?
I'm good. I don't have much to say. I ate 4 hot dogs yesterday, so I'm feeling good. And
good the day after you ate 4 hot dogs is doing better than anyone could expect.
And my media recommendations are: I'm reading Dune, and I'm listening to music that reminds me of Dune.
So you're fully immersing yourself in Dune.
Yeah, I'm listening to Advaitic songs by Ohm, and also listening to the album From Agony to Transcendence by the death metal band Nephren Ka, who exclusively sing about Dune.
Hell yeah.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm doing well. I have had a good week, but I do definitely feel like the post show, because we had the show that we talked about on the last few episodes. I definitely feel the post show like fatigue a little bit, where sometimes like when I'm in a show and then it ends, I have a hard time going back to the level of like motivation to do all the stuff that didn't end when the show ended. So I'm dealing with a little bit of that, but I'm still doing pretty good. And yeah, for Media Recs, I don't know if you've given it a listen yet or not, but Chelsea Wolfe, an artist that we both enjoy, released a new album last month called She Reaches Out to She Reaches Out to She, I believe is the correct title. And I gave it a listen this week, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really good. I also watched a found footage movie directed by Bobcat Goldthwait called Willow Creek, which is a Bigfoot found footage movie, and it was stupid, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. It's sort of a blatant ripoff of the Blair Witch Project, but with Bigfoot, which was not intentional, allegedly, on Bobcat Goldthwait's part, although he has been made aware of it and has like kind of jokingly referred to Willow Creek as the Blair Squatch Project in some interviews. So if you like Blair Witch and you want to see a dumb ripoff where the monster is Bigfoot, you check it out. It's a fun little found footage movie. Yeah, so that's it for me.
Thanks for those recomendaciones.
You're welcome. You know what? You are so welcome. I was so delighted to share those recommendations with you, David.
All right, fuck that shit. Let's talk about Dune.
Let's talk about Denis Villeneuve's Dune Part 1. Based on the half of the novel by Frank Herbert. Based on probably a little bit less than half of the novel by Frank Herbert.
Yeah.
I think where it ends is slightly before the half.
I think so. So we've both read the book.
Yeah.
What is your relationship with the book? Because I think we kind of read it around the same time.
Yeah. So I think I read it a little after you because I'm pretty sure you reading it was one of the things that prompted me to read it. And it was a combination of like I had seen you posting about it, and some other people who I'm friends with on like social media. I'd seen them talking about it. And I know a lot of people were reading it in advance of the movie coming out, right? So that's when I read it, was in like end of 2020 to early 2021, I think is when I read it. And it was very much a combination of like, okay, like a lot of people I know are reading this, and it would be fun to be part of the discourse on it. And also the movie's coming out, and I'm interested in the movie. I was interested in the movie because I like a lot of Denis Villeneuve's other movies. There's a lot of actors that I really like in this movie, so I was like, okay, like I'll probably want to go see that, but I think I want to read the book first. So I read a book, which was a monumental achievement for me. Does not happen often. Greatly enjoyed the book. I've still only read it all the way through the once. It is a book where sometimes I'll like go back to it and like read a specific chapter just because like I want it fresh in my brain, you know. But I've only sat down and read it front to back one time. When I say sat down, it sounds like I did it in one sitting. I did it over the course of several months.
Yeah.
But yeah, really, really enjoyed it. Love the book. Started the sequel, Dune Messiah, several times, and my natural inclination to not read has been too strong, and I haven't been able to make it very far into Messiah yet. But if Denis gets his third installment in this trilogy that he's planning to make, and he ends up making a Dune Messiah movie, I will definitely end up reading it before that comes out, because similarly, I want to have the book under my belt before seeing that movie, which I hope happens. David, tell me about your relationship with the Dune books.
So I bought the book a long time ago, and like a lot of books that I buy, it's sat on my shelf for years and collected dust.
Yeah.
And I had tried reading it a couple of times and would stall out within the first few pages because of all of the funny weird words. And then in 2020, I sat down and I was like, all right, I'm doing it. I'm going to read Dune.
You're
the
doing
movie's
it.
coming out. I'm doing it. I'm a fan of Villeneuve's movies as well. I've seen most of his movies once. I've seen Dune the most out of his movies. And there's a couple that I haven't. Prisoners is a big gap in my Villeneuve knowledge. But I've seen some of his early French Canadian films and stuff like that too. Great filmmaker. Definitely need to go back to his other movies as well. But I was really looking forward to this movie. Read the book in about 2 weeks, and I did not think it was good.
Interesting.
But I had a great time reading it.
Right.
Which was such an interesting experience to have with a book as opposed to a movie, because there's plenty of like so bad it's good movies that we could talk about that are technically not very good, but I have a good time with.
Yeah.
Never had that sort of experience with a book.
Yeah.
And I sat on it for a while. I watched the Lynch film. I watched the Sci-Fi Channel miniseries of Dune. I couldn't stop thinking about it. And then before the movie came out, I reread the book and really enjoyed it. Really had a legitimately good time with it and thought it was a lot better than I originally thought the first time.
Right. Yeah.
And then I read the rest of the series. I haven't read any of the books that were written by his son, Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson. Those, the fandom does not like those books, but
Yeah.
I've thought about giving them a try. And the rest of the series is really interesting, really weird, a little inconsistent in places, but I found Messiah really compelling and like almost essential to reading along with Dune. And then the movie came out, and I saw the movie 5 times in that like first month.
Yeah.
It is the most that I had watched a movie like in theaters or around its release probably since like The Dark Knight.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it released, the same day on HBO Max. So there would be times where I would go see it at the theater and then come home and
Just watch it again. Yeah. This was only my third time with this. I saw it once in the theater, and then I got it on Blu-ray and watched it again last year, and then watched it again for this record. I greatly enjoyed the first viewing, and I was interested in going back to it, but I didn't have the immediate need to rewatch it, the compulsion that you did.
I did very intentionally take a break. I think
Yeah.
I watched it in 2022 and then didn't watch it all the rest of that year, didn't watch it all last year. Got the opportunity to see it in IMAX earlier this year, about a month ago.
Mhm.
And that was my first time going back since then. And then rewatched it last night for this.
Yeah.
So this is probably viewing 7 or 8 at this point.
Hell yeah.
I own it on VHS.
You do. It's a working VHS.
Yeah, it's from one of those. It's from Caddy Video. They're like they make custom VHSs of new movies, and they make really limited runs of them. And it's sitting on my shelf. And I did check it. I didn't watch it the whole way through on VHS, but yeah, I don't think that I'm not the biggest Dune fan. Neither of us are the biggest Dune fan in the world. Let's get that out of the way.
No, yeah.
For the book nerds who are listening,
Right. For anyone who's a bigger Dune nerd than we are, we might, not talk about something or, say something that's slightly incorrect because we haven't read to all of the fucking expanded universe, the horse shit. But
yeah.
we've still dipped our toe in at least. Well, I've dipped my toe in. You've gone a little deeper than that.
Yeah, it's a universe that I find really interesting and compelling, and nothing has really gripped me the way that this has in a while.
I want to go back to one of the things you said about when you were reading the book for the first time, which is that initially you found it difficult to read because Frank Herbert just throws incomprehensible sci-fi bullshit terminology at you and refuses to explain what it means. The first time I read the book, I loved it immediately. And I've said this before, but I want to say it on the show. I've said it before to you and also on social media, but I just wanted to voice this on the podcast. I think the book and the movie play best if you approach it like an idiot, which is how I approached the book the first time, and that's also I feel like helpful when you're watching the movie to just be like, people are going to be saying shit that you don't understand, and instead of intellectualizing it and being like, let me try and figure out what this means, just be like, okay, Bene Gesserit, got it. I don't know what the fuck that is, but I assume I will eventually have an idea. And chances are you will. And any terminology that does not get explained, where you're like, the movie or the book ends and you're like, still don't know what that was, just be okay with it. Just do not ask questions.
That's what I had to learn. That's
Yes.
what I had to learn while reading.
Yeah.
The other thing that was really challenging for me that this movie, I think, wisely avoids is that the book is written in, I believe it's third person omniscient.
Yeah.
So multiple characters can be expressing their innermost thoughts and emotions on the same page,
Yes.
in the same paragraph, switching back and forth very quickly.
Yes. Yeah.
That it's it's something that comes up in Lynch's adaptation where we have to stop the movie so that the character can have a voiceover of the thoughts in their head.
Inner monologue. Yeah.
Their inner monologue. Yeah, that was what was really challenging for me. But yeah, it's one of the most interesting sci-fi universes that I've encountered. And after reading it and seeing the movie and understanding it, you realize that we've been ripping this story off for decades at this point.
I don't know what you mean, David.
Yeah.
Who's been ripping off Dune?
Oh, I just decided to set my space movie on a desert planet with a young boy who undergoes the hero's journey.
But it's totally different from Dune because instead of Paul, which is a name from the Bible, I chose Luke, which is a different name from the Bible. and he also has a magic sister, but her name's not Aaliyah, it's Leia. It's totally different. Sue me, Frank Herbert. We'll see who wins in court, you broke ass bitch.
Oh, sorry, Frank. I can't hear you over the fact that you're fucking dead and also that I'm a billionaire.
I'm just imagining Frank. I did read
Come over here and suck my dick while I sit on my throne made of Darth Vader voice changers.
Suck my sandworm. I was reading an interview with Frank Herbert from like 77 when Star Wars came out, and he's hadn't seen Star Wars yet, but he had heard about some of the similarities, and he took it seems like he took it pretty gentlemanly, right? He wasn't like, what the fuck, like this is a huge ripoff. Like he was pretty chill about it, but he did, in the interview he was like, I will try very hard not to sue. Which I thought was funny. And I just imagine him like he goes to see Star Wars with Beverly, his wife at the time, and he's like, Bev, I can't believe it. Bev, he's got psychic powers. Beverly.
The last song on Iron Maiden's album Peace of Mind is called To Tame a Land, and it's about Dune.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the bass player Steve Harris wrote it, and he wrote to the Frank Herbert estate, or he wrote to Frank Herbert's people. You know, Frank Herbert was still alive at the time. He wrote to them about their permission for him to call the song Dune, and the letter he got back was something like, Frank Herbert doesn't like rock bands, especially rock bands like Iron Maiden, which is hilarious. Yeah, Frank Herbert, interested in environmentalism, wrote this book as a commentary on religious extremism and fanaticism and fascism. Also, kind of a dick.
Yeah. by many accounts, he was something of an unpleasant person.
I think he like disowned his son, one of his sons who came out as gay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not cool.
Not cool.
Bad.
Interesting guy.
Yeah.
What an interesting guy.
Yeah. And also he was like distant cousins with Joe McCarthy and was like buddy with him for a little bit, but then to Frank Herbert's credit, once the blacklisting stuff started in the McCarthy era, he was like, hey, what the fuck, man? And stopped talking to his cousin over that. So, I mean, I guess good for you, but also, you know, maybe you shouldn't have been homophobic to your own son. You know, mixed bag with old Frank. Also, just what a horny little weirdo.
Oh, man. This ain't even the book is very horny.
I've heard some of the stuff about the sequels.
Even hornier.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, but it is hilarious how much modern sci-fi owes to literally just one book.
Yeah.
Like it's like we have a generation of people, multiple generations of people at this point, whose like whole idea of sci-fi is like heavily informed by Star Wars, and you can trace a direct line to most of the major ideas in Star Wars just to Dune, right?
And the failed adaptation of the film in the 70s from Alejandro Jodorowsky.
Yeah.
That influenced
hugely
so many sci-fi movies.
Right, we wouldn't have Alien without it.
Yeah, we had H.R. Giger working on that. We had Dan O'Bannon, who went on to do Alien, Ron Cobb, who also worked on Alien. That movie's another... That movie that never happened is another huge like nexus point for all of the science fiction ideas and aesthetics that have taken off since then.
You know what this is making me realize? We would not have one of the most divisive films, probably the most divisive film in our friendship, Event Horizon, if we did not have Alien, right? That's it.
Sure.
You can trace a clear path from Alien to Event Horizon.
Because Event Horizon is, what if Alien was shitty?
Fuck you. And we wouldn't have Alien without Jodorowsky's failed Dune project, which of course we wouldn't have without Frank Herbert writing the book. So thank you, Frank Herbert, for the masterpiece that is Event Horizon. Anyway,
let's talk about the movie, Justice.
Okay.
I think because part 2 is coming out, we shouldn't spoil anything that happens in the second half of the book.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
I think we'll cover the material that is present in this movie.
Great.
Also, we're fans of the book, and we will probably talk about things from the book as they come up,
Yeah.
but we're not going to sit here and do like a one-to-one comparison.
Right. This isn't a podcast about Dune the book, despite how much we just talked about Frank Herbert and the novel Dune. We're mostly going to be focusing on the movie. So yeah, we're not going to be giving you the whole play-by-play of Frank Herbert's Dune.
So the movie opens with a prologue from Chani, played by Zendaya, who does not appear until the end of the film, that sets up the world of Arrakis and the economy of spice harvesting that runs the empire, which we get some more information about that's kind of drip fed to us throughout the movie.
Yeah, and if you're already confused, just don't worry about it. Eventually, some of this will make sense. But yeah, it's basically a situation, where these are, the indigenous population of Arrakis is having their world ravaged by resource extraction, which is an idea that we're familiar with from many real world examples. many such cases, in the Middle East historically, which it's no accident that Frank Herbert very heavily based the Fremen culture on Arabic cultures, right? And the Fremen language on the Arabic language, which this movie, adapts directly from the book, basically. So yeah, these are space Muslims, and spice is both oil, it's both petroleum, and also it's psilocybin.
Yeah, it's a hallucinogenic substance that allows the navigators of the Spacing Guild to do the complex calculations required to transport these huge ships across space.
Right.
It's the complex calculations and like reflexes required for interstellar travel.
Yes, you have to do space shrooms in order to be able to do math complicated enough to travel between the stars.
Yeah, and Arrakis is the only planet where it's found. So if you control that planet, you essentially control the universe.
Yeah, it's like having a monopoly on fucking gasoline.
Yeah. So this movie opens with the Harkonnens have been oppressing Arrakis, and then one day, by imperial decree, they all leave.
Yep. The Emperor says, Harkonnens, you get lost, you're out of here, you're out of the spice game, and it's time for somebody new to take over, which is the Atreides.
Yes. So we open on Castle Caladan, on the planet of Caladan, which is the homeworld of House Atreides.
Yeah.
In the year 10,191.
Yes.
But actually, Justice. It's more like 20,000 years in the future. Because in the books it's 10,191 AG,
yes,
which is after Guild.
Yes.
So the Spacing Guild is founded in the year 10,000, and then they reset the calendar.
Yes.
So we're really talking something that's 20,000 years in the future.
Yes, we're halfway to Warhammer 40K.
Sorry, I just wanted to put my fucking book nerd hat on for a minute.
Yes. There's also a thing from the book and from some of the other books in the series. It's explained a little bit deeper. They don't really mention it in the movie at all, which I think is a strong choice because it would be distracting and it doesn't actually matter for the story that they're telling. But there is a thing called the Butlerian Jihad that happened at some point in the past in the books. And like I've said, I've only read the first book, and I don't think they tell you specifically how long ago the Butlerian Jihad was, but at some point in the distant past, essentially Terminator happened. Where Terminator 2 Judgment Day specifically, right? The Judgment Day situation happened. Where Sarah and John Connor weren't able to stop it, and the robots basically almost fully eradicated humanity. There was a war between thinking computers, thinking machines, and humanity, and as a result of that, humanity did eventually win the war, but they were almost completely driven to extinction by the machines, right? And so in the world of Dune, now 20,000 years from our present day, right? They don't they have future technology, like futuristic technology, but they don't have computers. It's all like really analog future technology.
Yeah.
Because there's like a rule in the religion that dominates this society, which one of their like 10 commandments is basically thou shalt not make computer in the image of a human mind, essentially to avoid Butlerian jihad round 2.
Yeah.
Right. So all of that nerdy horse shit to say, this is a very interesting sci-fi world that we're being introduced to, and you kind of get this immediately in this movie, where it's like, even though it's very far flung in the future, these people are also kind of living like it's the Middle Ages, which is very interesting.
Yeah, it's a really interesting setting, and there are guns and stuff like that in this movie as well. But everyone's mostly using swords,
right? Which, again, to put on my nerd hat, is because in the book they explain that if you shoot one of the body shields, or like they're not just body shields, they also have them on like buildings and ships and stuff. But if you shoot one of the shields with a laser gun, it can make like a nuclear sized explosion happen. Like there's some way that the laser and the fucking shield interact where everything will just fucking explode. And then also the shields block anything that moves super fast. So like a projectile, just like a regular bullet, would like bounce off the shield, right? And the only way that you can penetrate the shield, which they show in a scene that's coming up in a little bit here, is basically like you have to move through the shield slowly in order to penetrate it, and then you can fucking like stab somebody or whatever. So yeah, it is very kind of like medieval, just due to the rules of the world.
Yeah,
right?
and all out war is an extremely costly and destructive move for one house to make against another,
right?
Because everyone has access to atomic weapons.
Right.
There's stuff like the Holtzman effect, which is the shields and the interacting with the lasers and stuff like that. So a lot of the way that warfare is conducted in this universe is through sabotage and assassinations and poison, or in as we're about to see in the course of this movie, just like an elaborate scheme that is set up to basically wipe out this entire house.
Plans within plans within plans.
Yeah. So the House Atreides is set to inherit control of Arrakis by imperial decree. This is something that they are aware is a trap, but they also know that it's like a big opportunity.
Yes, it's
for
a
their family.
A trap that if they manage to wiggle themselves out of, then they stand to benefit enormously from. Right, so it's a risky situation, but also they kind of can't say no, because the Emperor is saying you have to do this, right? So it's also they're also kind of stuck, right? Where it's like, you know, the Emperor is saying like, would you do this? But what he really means is you have no choice. You will be doing this.
Yeah. So the ceremony.
Beverly, there's a galactic emperor. Beverly, get my lawyer on the phone.
No, you see, it's different, Frank. You got no case, buddy, because my emperor, he's called Emperor Palpatine, whereas your guy's called the Padisha Emperor. It's totally different. It's just a case of parallel thinking, Frank. So why don't you take that lawsuit and shove it up your ass?
Frank, I got away with selling a cardboard box to kids with pictures of action figures on it in Christmas of 1977. You think you're gonna defeat me? You're nothing, baby.
Who's the quiz-ass Hatterack now, bitch? Frank, I already told you. There's a big mouth in the desert on Tatooine, but it's not a worm under there. It's a sarlacc pit. You don't know what it looks like under the sand, buddy. That's not a worm at all.
How are Paul Atreides' Halloween costumes going for you, huh? You selling any of those?
Hey, buddy, I saw you at the convention last week. You look like you're doing pretty rough. If you need a helping hand, just let me know. I'd be willing to write you a check.
Oh, hey, Frank. Good to see ya. Oh, sorry, I can't stay and chat. I have to go get dinner with Steven Spielberg and Francis Ford Coppola.
I heard about that Jodorowsky guy. He was going to adapt your book into a movie. How'd that go for you? Anyway, I'll say hi to Steven for you.
So our first really big scene here is the ceremony to transfer power of Arrakis to House Atreides. And this is where we get a really good sense of like the sense of scale in this movie. With we see the guild Highliner, which is these huge guild ships. It's a giant tube in space, and
Yes.
it's awesome.
Yes, it looks like the way space travel works in this adaptation of Dune is if you go through the tube, you're somewhere else in space. There's a shot where like you can see through the tube, you can see Caladan, right? But it doesn't continue past the edge of the ship. The hole in the middle of the tube is like a portal, like a wormhole that takes you somewhere else in the universe. And the guild navigator is just doing a shit ton of math to make sure that he doesn't put you in the event horizon hell dimension instead. That's what happens if you don't get the guild navigators enough spice.
You just go where the event horizon
you end
went.
up in the hell dimension from event horizon. you come back fucking holding your own eyeballs and being like, liberate tutte me. Yeah. Now that is a Dune spinoff that I would enjoy. Or a crossover event that I would enjoy. Just a side story in the Dune universe where a ship accidentally ends up in the hell dimension.
Yeah.
Sam Neill's there being like, do you see? Anyway.
Yeah, it's not really clear to me how it works. Because I kind of think that I kind of thought that too while I was watching, but I've never quite been able to tell. And but they're these huge tube ships. They look amazing, and then we see the smaller ship that is completely, the Highliner itself completely dwarfs it, and then we see it land this huge like sphere of a ship, and it's also huge. I think this movie has just a great sense of scale and design, which is kind of trademark Villeneuve. If you watch Blade Runner 2049, this is stuff he's already done too.
Yeah, and Arrival too. I feel like the sense of scale and a lot of kind of similar brutalist production design in Arrival as well, with the alien ships and that and stuff. Yeah.
I want to call out this actor who's playing the Herald of the Change.
Yes.
His name is Benjamin Clementine. He's primarily a musician. This is his first movie role. And this is just a small, nothing...
It's one scene.
...bit part.
Yeah.
It's one scene.
He's on screen for like 4 minutes.
He's basically just here to, carry out the Emperor's wishes to change over control of Arrakis. And he puts everything into this performance.
He does. It rocks. It rocks. He's got like this huge ass scroll. He's in like the ceremonial outfit, and he looks very physically impressive. And then the performance just matches it. It's a really good little bit part.
Yeah, he delivers every line like it's the Royal Shakespeare Company.
Yeah,
he's so good.
Which, by the way, Shakespeare isn't a bad comparison for the vibe of this movie in general. It does feel a lot of the performances, but also sort of and some of this is down to Frank Herbert's plot from the book. A lot of it feels very Shakespearean tragedy, like palace intrigue. Most of what's happening isn't direct action that you see. It's a lot of people talking about ways that they're going to, get revenge on each other or fuck each other over, right? And it's like all of these interconnected bloodlines. Baron Harkonnen calls Leto cousin at one point. It all feels kind of very Shakespeare to me. So I think the Shakespearean performance, right, that he's doing, but also that a couple of other actors I feel like are sort of tapping into that kind of classical performance thing, really fits the tone.
Yeah, I think Oscar Isaac as well is tapping into that, like you said.
And Rebecca Ferguson, I think.
Yeah. And because I love his response to this declaration that the Herald of the Change makes, that now we're transferring control of the planet. And he says, where House Atreides, there is no call that we do not answer. There is no faith that we betray.
Yep.
And again, just delivering every single one of those lines with such specific intent and purpose in a way that's also very grandiose and very epic in a kind of Shakespearean way.
Yeah. So the handoff has happened. And we get a little bit of stuff here early in the movie with House Atreides on Caladan, right? As they're preparing to take over Arrakis. We meet kind of our main cast of characters on the Atreides side. We meet Paul, who's played by Timothée Chalamet. Or is it? I've heard it's Timothée.
It's Timothée in French. But people just say Timothy.
Yeah. It's insane to me that Timothée is how you say that name. I almost want to exclusively use the correct pronunciation because I find it hilarious and not because it's correct. But so Timothée is Paul Atreides, our protagonist, right? And then the aforementioned Oscar Isaac is Duke Leto, his dad, and then we got Rebecca Ferguson as Lady Jessica, his mom. And we're also introduced to some of our other folks here, Gurney Halleck, played by Josh Brolin, and Duncan Idaho, played by Jason Momoa. So that's kind of like the group that we're following here at first on the Atreides side. And we get a few scenes kind of introducing each of those characters. How do you feel about Momoa in this movie?
So I know he was kind of a controversial choice among fans of the book.
Yeah.
Because Duncan Idaho has a very small role in the first book, but he's kind of like Boba Fett, where the fans really latched onto him and really liked him. So this isn't necessarily a spoiler that really matters, but Frank Herbert brings him back for the subsequent books.
Yeah.
And I've heard that he's a lot of people wish they had cast a different actor. I kind of love that it's Jason Momoa's dude's rocking his way through this movie.
Yes. I mostly like what he's doing. There are definitely some moments where I'm like, it feels like he's on a very different wavelength than a lot of the other actors. Like, it feels like his performance is tuned to a different frequency from everybody else some of the time. And it bothers me very slightly in a few moments, and the rest of the time it's fine.
Yeah, there's moments where the dialogue throughout the film feels a hair too contemporary or modern, or
right,
and not the way you would expect people to talk 20,000 years in the future in space.
Right.
And some of that comes through with Momoa.
Yeah, some of it comes through with Timothée as well.
Yeah.
Some of his deliveries, I'm like, that sounded really 2021.
Please stop saying it like that. Stop saying his name like that. I hate it.
That's how it's said, David.
One of the things I really like about Duncan Idaho and Jason Momoa, though, is how this movie demonstrates his relationship with Paul.
Yeah.
There's only a few scenes that they have together, but you get a really good sense of how close they are.
Yeah, and a lot of that's down to Momoa's kind of big charismatic thing that he's doing here.
Yeah.
Where he's like, slapping him on the shoulder and being like, "You're beefing up and shit."
Yeah.
So anyway, then we go to a little fight training sequence where Josh Brolin as Gurney Halleck is introduced. And this is where we're talking about the shield thing with the swords. That's demonstrated here. They do a fun little bit of fight choreo when they're, Gurney's training him. And he's trying to make sure that Paul's like ready to be somewhere as dangerous as Arrakis is kind of the idea.
Yeah.
He's like warning him about the dangers that are going to be there.
Yeah, it's not really explored here, but Gurney Halleck has a past with the Harkonnens. He was a slave for many years with the Harkonnens, and Paul doesn't quite understand how dangerous the situation is.
Right.
And Gurney is really like, no, you need to be ready.
Yeah.
You haven't met Harkonnens before. I have. They're not humans. They're brutal. And
Brutal.
They're brutal. I think Brolin does a great job with Gurney Halleck as well.
I love Josh Brolin in this movie. Also, he is crazy jacked for a 56-year-old man.
Yeah.
He in this fight training sequence, he's wearing like a t-shirt with like fitted sleeves that are fitted very well to his arms, and I was like, man, Josh Brolin is fucking huge. And I know that that's like not a novel observation. He was Thanos, and I know that they CGI'd him onto a big purple body, right? But it's already because he had the face of a man who is enormous and muscled. And the voice. But yeah, I was just looking at him and I was like, man, what a fucking, silver fox, a fucking beefed up silver daddy. And I love him in this movie. I think his performance is great.
In the books, Gurney Halleck is characterized as like a warrior poet.
Yeah.
And he plays an instrument called the balisay, which I am very angry is not in this movie, Denis.
Yeah, but it might be in the next one.
I hope so.
It better be.
It better be.
Yeah.
I guess there was a scene, but they cut it, and
Right.
Denis didn't release any of the deleted scenes from this movie. But what I will say about Josh Brolin is his performance still has that element to it of the kind of warrior poet spirit, where there's moments where he's very aggressive and very intense, but also moments where he can be kind of wistful and jovial and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it's really fun to see him. There's points in the movie where he's quoting something
Mhm.
to himself, and you see that little like spark on his face that I would expect from like the Gurney Halleck that I read
Yeah.
about.
Yeah, I think he's a good fit for the character, both for like for what the movie needs him to do, and also like kind of a faithful performance to how the character's portrayed in the book as well. Yeah, some visitors show up, and they are ladies in terrifying hats and veils, and these are the Bene Gesserit. And they pay a little visit here. Lady Jessica, Rebecca, who's played by Rebecca Ferguson, wakes up Timothée in the middle of the night, and is like, "Hey, come with me. There's something you got to do." And this is the fucking Gom Jabbar, man.
Yeah, this is the scene that opens the book.
Yep.
And I love that we get some more background and other scenes that lead up to this in the movie. It feels like a really big moment. Essentially, what's been happening is Paul Atreides has been having dreams.
Yeah.
And he's been having dreams about a girl on Arrakis.
Yes, he is. He's having dreams about Zendaya, which has never happened to me, but I imagine has happened to many men.
Yeah, I love the way that this scene feels, the atmosphere of this moment. The Bene Gesserit ship lands in the rain, and we don't see it. We just see the lights of it and like the outline of it. And Hans Zimmer's score, which I'm sure we'll talk about in much more detail, is very dramatic, very spooky and intense here. And also the Bene Gesserit witch, the Reverend Mother, played by Charlotte Rampling.
Yeah.
I think this performance is great.
Yep.
I think the costuming is also great.
Yep.
She has this veil over her face that looks like a spider web, and I think that's how it's described in the book.
Yeah.
And it really obscures her face. And she's basically here to give this test to Paul.
Yes. To see if he's human. Which is an idea from the book. Basically, it's like, do you have enough control over do you have enough self-control, right, to be entrusted with great power is basically what the test is trying to determine, right? Yeah. And what the test is he puts his hand in a box, and she puts a poison needle to his neck, and if he takes his hand out of the box, he's fucking dead. And what's in the box, David?
Pain.
It rocks so hard. It's this sequence is pretty much exactly how I imagined it when I was reading the book.
Yeah.
They really capture this scene from the book perfectly. And yeah, it rules. It's great.
One thing that I really love about this scene is Rebecca Ferguson.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
So essentially, Rebecca Ferguson is a Bene Gesserit. She's
Yes.
part of this order.
Yep.
And the book and the movie constantly have her weighing her loyalties to House Atreides against her loyalties to the Bene Gesserit.
Yes.
So
And
she's standing outside the room, and because Paul has to have this test,
Mm-hmm.
and she can't be there to witness it, but also to guard the room, basically. So if any of the House Atreides guards try to enter the room, she has to kill them.
Mm-hmm.
And she's also scared for her son at this moment, and scared for herself. And she conveys those emotions so well in this performance.
I was initially, the first time I watched this movie, early on, I don't think this moment specifically, but there's a moment a little bit later where she's wrestling kind of with the same emotions.
Yeah.
Where it's when she's like walking down the hallway, and she's sort of like crying a little bit, but also actively kind of forcing herself to stop crying and to like calm down. I liked the acting that she was doing, but I was sort of like, I don't know, like if Lady Jessica in the book reads as that outwardly emotional to me, right? And then I thought about it a little bit more, and also later on in the movie, gained some appreciation for this direction, for this performance, where I was like, oh yeah, because like that internal life stuff that you get in the book, it's hard to get without doing some kind of inner monologue voiceover shit like in David Lynch's Dune, right? So I'm like, okay, they're externalizing this stuff a little bit more than maybe her character would in the book. Like, I don't see Lady Jessica in the book breaking down and crying, you know? But like, she has to do that because it's the most economical way for the movie version to communicate what she's feeling, right? And so on my second and third watch of it, I stopped having that issue with that handling of the performance, where I was like, no, yeah, actually this is the correct decision.
Yeah.
And I really like what you were just talking about with this scene. Her kind of doing that same thing where she's calming herself down and simultaneously like outwardly showing that she's very upset. And that the conflicting kind of emotions of mother or the conflicting motivations of being a mother and being a Bene Gesserit are kind of like coming to a head. And then she does the litany against fear, and it's fucking great.
This is another thing that they externalize in this movie.
Yeah.
That I think is done really well.
Yes.
In the book, Paul is reciting this to himself while he's experiencing the pain of the test, to calm himself down. And because we can't have him doing the voiceover,
right?
What we do is we have Jessica recite that. And as Jessica, this is the "I must not fear, fear's the mind killer," which is the famous quote from this book.
Yeah.
As she recites it and it goes on, she becomes more calm and more brave. And we're intercutting that with Paul doing the same thing.
Yeah.
So it very clearly communicates that Paul is also reciting this in his own head while it's happening. And I just think, I thought this the first time I saw it, and I thought it again last night. I think that was a fucking brilliant way to introduce this idea into the film.
Agreed. This scene also introduces the vocal motif that is on the soundtrack for the first time. This kind of this female vocalist whose name I unfortunately do not know does a fucking terrific job on this Hans Zimmer soundtrack. And there's kind of like a vocal swell. She's kind of doing this it is reminiscent intentionally of like Muslim religious like traditional music to some extent, right? Like a call to prayer type thing. But also, you know, it's got some other influences as well. And it's a really cool bit of music, and it fucking rocks. And this is the first time you hear it in this movie, and it's used a couple other times, and every single time it's like fucking chills up my spine.
That's cool. I was initially not that into it.
Oh, interesting.
I thought, I mean, it's an interesting melody. It's a commanding performance, but I thought that my one quibble with the score is that Hans Zimmer leaned into it too much.
Oh,
and it starts feeling a little bit like the stereotypical Hollywood movie, establishing shot of a Middle Eastern country, and we have someone in the background going, yeah.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
But watching it last night, it finally clicked for me that this motif is used at very key points in Paul's character arc.
Yes, and I think it's sort of the audio the audio motif of like his prescience being awakened.
Yes.
Right? His future sight, right? So yeah, he passes the Gom Jabbar test. Charlotte Rampling's like, this kid's fucking very intense, but I didn't have to stab him with this poison needle, so guess I'll fly back to Bene Gesserit world.
His midichlorians are off the charts. Not even Yoda has a midichlorian count that high. Hey, Frank, you know that space magic that you made that I stole for my movies? I turned it into bugs that live in your fucking blood. Go fuck yourself.
And instead of the Bene Gesserit creating a perfect human to fulfill a prophecy, instead it's the Jedi Council who is testing little boys' blood to see if they're the chosen one. So it's totally different.
And I gave them a laser sword that I can sell to kids to play with and make millions of dollars.
Hey, Frank, I noticed there's a lot of sword fighting in your book, but guess what, buddy? There's no laser swords. If you were a 10-year-old boy, Frank, which one do you think you'd want to buy more? A regular, boring metal sword or a fucking laser sword, you broke bitch?
We're leaving all the Lucas stuff in.
Yeah.
Leaving all that in.
Cut the plot summary out and only do the Lucas.
So after the scene, we get a little bit more information about the Bene Gesserit's motives, what they're there for, what they're trying to, figure out in regards to Paul. They're trying to see if he's the Kwisatz Haderach.
The Kwisatz Haderach, yes. Which is the Ubermensch. It's basically a guy who is so genetically superior that he literally can see into the past and future. It's Frank Herbert's loves this idea that like because there's no like computers in this world, not only is like all the technology analog, but also humans have essentially had to evolve mentally a lot, right? So like we got Mentats, which is Stephen McKinley Henderson's character, Thufir Hawat, he's basically like a human computer. David Dastmalchian plays the other one, which we'll get to David Dastmalchian. Anyway, so there's those guys who can like think so fast and accurately that they're basically like human computers. And then there's also people like the Bene Gesserit who like have such strict control, like their mind is so powerful that it can control like their anatomy, like they can control their own reproductive systems and alter their voice so that it becomes a mind control mechanism, which is called the voice, right? And so there's all that shit, right? And so basically what the Bene Gesserit are trying to do is like breed someone selectively who has all of these characteristics of like a Mentat and also like has all this Bene Gesserit hoodoo bullshit, right? Inherently just genetically in them, and then also like train that person to the point where they then unlock kind of the next level of human like mental evolution, which is just being able to look into the future. And the idea is basically like if you're smart enough and have enough data, then you can essentially see the future because you can see every potential possibility, like every potential outcome from any decision that is made, right?
And these abilities are starting to awaken in Paul because Jessica has been training him in the Bene Gesserit way, against her orders from the Bene Gesserit.
Yes, they said, don't do that. It's not time yet. The Kwisatz Haderach is a few generations away.
Yeah. And also, she was instructed to bear only daughters,
right?
And because she has control of her body and her reproductive organs, she chose to have a male because she's in love with the Duke and she wanted to give him an heir.
And also kind of because she really wants to be the mom of the Kwisatz Haderach is I think part of the thing here too. She's like, I know the whole Bene Gesserit plan. I know that it's a few generations off, but I think I got a Kwisatz Haderach in me. Let me see if I can pop one out.
And I love that the movie explains all of this in less terms than we just used. The movie really just, in relation to the Kwisatz Haderach stuff, in relation to the prophecies and the legends of the Fremen and the Lisan al-Gaib, the movie kind of skips over them. And just briefly mentions them and references them.
It does what it should do for a visual medium, right? Which is it shows you a lot more than it tells you, right? You get a lot of the stuff with Paul just through the way that his visions are presented on screen, right? And you get a lot of like the Fremen prophecy stuff. You just get it in the way that a movie is best equipped to show it to you, which is like, there's shots of like Fremen with like prayer books and stuff, and there's like like crowds of them like waiting as he passes by and stuff, so you don't need to spend as much time in the dialogue about it because it's like the way that they indicate this stuff visually does a lot of the talking for the movie.
Before we get to Arrakis, I really just want to focus in on this. It's a very short sequence that didn't need to go as hard as it did, but it's leaving Caladan.
Yes.
And we see this giant, like concrete slab of a ship
Yes.
rise up from the water
Yes.
with water streaming off of it.
James Cameron's watching this movie and just
Like-
jerking off.
Why didn't I think of this for Avatar? And Hans Zimmer's going fucking ham. And Paul is watching the ships leave and like spending his last few moments on Caladan, and he like grabs a tuft of grass
Yeah.
because he knows this is the last time he's going to see grass for a while.
Yes.
And also, puts his hand in the oceans of Caladan.
Yep.
As these giant brutalist nightmare ships start leaving.
Yep.
While Hans Zimmer just goes ham.
I do think it's funny in this sequence as well. We do get a brief scene of packing up the house.
Yeah.
We see like all of the stuff from the Atreides castle being like put in like wood crates, and like they're like lined with like cushioning so if the fragile shit doesn't get broken. It was just very funny because I was like, yes, the Atreides hired movers, and I assume they don't have to hire movers because this society is like medieval fiefs, right? So all of these people are just peasants who are fucking indentured to these rich assholes anyway.
Yeah.
They have to do whatever they're told. But it's Oscar Isaac telling them, and he has kind eyes. So he's the good one. Anyway, so yeah, we show up on Arrakis. I love the first the scene of them arriving on Arrakis. This whole
Yes.
sequence is so great because basically like the ships show up, these brutalist ships that David was describing land on in the desert, right? And the ship opens, and Oscar Isaac and Rebecca Ferguson and Timothée and their whole crew come out, and there's fucking bagpipes.
The bagpipes
Yes.
are such a good choice.
And that is not in the book. That was just
Yeah.
a decision that they made for the movie. And I'm like, fucking yes, House Atreides fucking instrument is bagpipes. Which actually also is fun because a lot of what they shot for the Caladan scenes was in Scotland. A lot of the locations that they were at for Caladan was Scotland. So it ties kind of into the whole. The Atreides kind of come from space Scotland, right? And so the bagpipes fucking are going the fuck off here.
I love the Atreides armor
Oh yeah,
that Leto is wearing and Gurney Halleck is wearing.
yes.
They look like dumb action figures, and I love it.
Okay, I'm glad you said that because the Podmaster was watching the beginning of this movie with me. She had never seen it before. She's not a big sci-fi person at all. Quite the opposite. And so she didn't finish the movie and doesn't really intend to, which I'm not offended by.
Yeah, she told me.
It's not for
She
her.
asked me. I made her ask me what I was reading the other day.
Yeah.
And I told her I was reading Dune, and she told me to fuck off. Which is very funny.
Yeah.
She's very anti-Dune.
Just anti-sci-fi in general. It's not her genre. She just generally doesn't enjoy it, which is fine. Although I do think this is the perfect episode to introduce one of her new on-mic names. We'll probably
God,
still
right.
mostly use the Podmaster because it's shorter and easier to say. But I do think High Priestess Pod, which is another name that we workshopped.
She mandated it.
Yes, she mandated High Priestess Pod as an on-mic name. I think High Priestess Pod, the perfect episode for that to debut, is the Dune episode because it does sort of sound like the Bene Gesserit in charge of the Bene Gesserit podcasting network. That sounds like what her official title would be. She's High Priestess Pod of the Bene Gesserit. Anyway, so but while we were watching this, to go back to the thing about the armor, High Priestess Pod did say about the guys who were in the armor but also had the helmets on. She was like, they look like Bionicles. Which, in order to get the Bionicle joke, you have to be either our age or exactly 5 years older or younger, right? Within that range. But nobody else will have any clue what the fuck that is.
Yep. Well, and there's another bit of costuming here that I want to point out because it's very brief, and then we'll move on to the ornithopters.
Yes.
Thufir Hawat, who we haven't really talked about much because he doesn't play a huge role in the movie.
He doesn't.
But Thufir Hawat is in like a military uniform and a hat.
Yes.
And he looks like a Nazi.
He does. A
He
lot
looks-
of the Atreides uniforms have kind of a fascist uniform kind of
Right.
aesthetic to them.
It's a lot more subtle
Yeah.
than I expected. I watched Starship Troopers recently, which I've seen many times, and it's very overt in that.
Yeah.
But this most recent viewing, I was like, oh, he kind of looks like an SA officer,
Right.
the brown shirts,
Right.
and it's or even like a kind of dictator, like your idea of like a military dictator, how he would look. And it's only on this most recent viewing that it kind of clicked for me.
Yeah.
And it's a really well done, I think, subtle bit of a very intentional costuming.
Yeah.
For the Atreides and what House Atreides is going to come to represent in the subsequent sequels.
Yeah.
You know.
While we're talking about Thufir Hawat's costuming, we already said he's not in the movie a ton. We might as well just quickly touch on Stephen McKinley Henderson. I think he's great in this movie. Always great to see him. Fucking love him. And yeah, just it's always a delight when he's in something in a little bit.
Yeah, I haven't seen him in a ton of things. I think he does a good job.
Yeah.
It's just I think it's a matter of the character doesn't have a big role to play in this movie.
Right.
And I think that's true of a lot of the cast.
Yeah.
This is a 2.5-hour movie, and it's immaculately paced. It breezes by for me.
Yeah.
But as a result, we don't get a ton of time with this very big cast of great actors.
Yeah.
In a lot of cases.
Yeah.
We're moving between things really quickly.
I do like when he does the little mentat calculations, his eyes kind of roll back into his head. That's kind of a fun touch.
Yeah, that's really the only reference to him being a mentat.
Also, it's not in this scene, but I might as well mention it now. I am obsessed with his little paper umbrella in one of the future scenes, because he's like still wearing like his kind of fascist dictator uniform, but he's also holding like a delicate, adorable little paper umbrella to protect him from the hot Arakeen sun. It's very cute.
Yeah. There's also native Fremen
Yes.
here, or natives to Arrakis, that have gathered to see House Atreides arrive. They're shouting Lisan al-Gaib, and this is something that Paul asks Jessica about. And essentially what's happened is the Bene Gesserit have implanted myths and superstitions throughout the galaxy.
Yeah.
In hopes that they can land on a planet and immediately have control over that native population because they match the prophesized messiahs of their superstitions.
Right.
And the Fremen and the natives to Arrakis have seen that in Paul. They see those signs in Paul.
Right. So immediately they think that he's the one.
Yes.
So then then we go to the ornithopter and we fly to Arakeen,
yes.
Right? The city on Arrakis where they're going to be living. And this is the thing that I wanted to call out in the sequence visually. I fucking love them flying over the shield wall, which is like this big kind of stone barrier that protects the city from the desert. And then over the city. And it is just like, it's gorgeous. It's also hideous, which I think it rocks. It's basically hideous architecture depicted very beautifully, right? Shot very beautifully. But it's like this kind of horrible brutalist, collection of rough geometric shapes that are all kind of smashed together as buildings, right? And it's because it's so inhospitable that it's like you don't want any windows really because the sun coming in is awful, right? So they basically have had to construct like a above ground cave is sort of the thing that they have to live in as a city. And I just love the way it looks. It looks so rad.
Yeah.
And it's shot so well. And then coming up to like the palace, which is kind of like this big, grotesque, brutalist pyramid that's looming over all these other littler buildings.
Yeah, that's what I was going to mention. It reminds me of like an Egyptian city with a pyramid.
Yeah.
And
to me,
but
it
in
also,
the future.
Yeah. To me, it also kind of looks like Mayan or Aztec, right?
Yeah.
Like, cause it's more like those square pyramids, you know? Really cool visuals. And I just love this sequence.
And I need to nerd out about the ornithopters.
Yeah.
The ornithopters are one of the coolest science fiction ships I've ever seen. In the books they're described very briefly. It's just like it's basically a ship that can sort of flap its wings.
Yeah.
And the movie translates that to these ships basically have wings like dragonflies.
Yeah.
That they build up very slowly, and then they are moving at extremely fast speeds, and the ship looks like a dragonfly. The sound design on these things is immaculate.
Yes, it rocks. It rocks.
And there's tons of practical ones. The visual effects for these look fantastic. And the thing that I love the most about the ornithopters, which we see more later in the movie, is the instrument panel is all analog dials.
Yes.
Because there's no computers.
Yeah.
It's all analog dials and instruments. And I think it looks so brilliant.
Yes.
I lost my mind in the theater the first time I saw this movie.
Yeah.
At the instrument panel in the ornithopter.
It
Because
absolutely...
I'm a fucking dork.
It absolutely rocks, though. You're totally right. You're completely right. Yeah, the ornithopter design is perfect. It's such a cool interpretation of how they're described in the book. It's an amazing piece of production design. So anyway, so then they're settling in the palace, right? We have like a scene of Duke Leto talking to Gurney Halleck about how they're gonna handle taking care of Arrakis and stuff. This is where Josh Brolin has a very funny line that is literally directly from the book, which is out here you wipe your ass with sand. Which is very funny that's a direct Frank Herbert line. Paul's also on their way to Arrakis. He's been like learning about like the local stuff, so he's getting some knowledge of the planet and stuff. The next big thing that happens is probably us going to Giedi Prime, right?
Yeah, we went to Giedi Prime a little bit before.
Yeah,
and in the beginning of the movie, we were introduced to the Harkonnens.
Yes,
Baron Harkonnen, played by Stellan Skarsgård,
in a fat suit,
in a great looking fat suit.
Yes.
And then the Beast Raban, played by Dave Bautista.
Yes.
And Peter de Vries, played by David Dalmastian.
Yes, David Dasmalchian.
Dasmalchian?
Dasmalchian.
Thank you.
I think Dasmalchian. It might be Dasmalkian. Not sure. David Dasmalchian, or Malkian as the case may be, has had a great few years. That guy keeps popping up in shit, and I know he's been doing shit for a while. But like he was in this, he was in fucking Oppenheimer. He's like I feel like I've seen more of him recently than I ever have before. And every time he shows up, I'm like, yes, there is my fucking guy.
People loved him in the James Gunn Suicide Squad movie.
Yeah.
I haven't seen a ton of stuff with him in like a main role.
Yeah.
But love seeing him in a supporting role.
Yeah. And I love him as Peter de Vries because in the book and also very much in the movie, even though you get less of him, his vibe is very much like this is like a creepy, sick little weirdo, right? But also he's like constantly afraid for his life, right? So he's like he's not quite like a sniveling little shit creature like I like to see in movies a lot of the time, but he's sort of the upper crust version of that. I love him in this movie. I love his kind of like shifty little eyes being like, okay, so this is what we're doing, huh? Okay.
I love Dave Bautista.
Yeah,
Dave Bautista is the best wrestler turned actor.
Oh yeah,
by far.
This is our first Bautista movie that we're covering. Yeah, he's great.
Not enough of him in this.
I agree. He's gonna be a bigger part of part 2, I'm sure.
Yeah, and his character isn't a main part of the books either. He's not a huge character in the books.
He's kind of barely in the books.
Yeah,
I would say he's maybe in this movie, just part 1, more than that character is in the books.
Yeah. But I love his performance in this, and I love the way he characterizes Raban, Raban is like the Baron's nephew.
Mm-hmm.
And then his other nephew is Fade Routha, who is going to be in the second one.
Yeah.
But Raban is the big, hulking, brutal, violent...
idiot nephew.
Older idiot nephew. And I love the way that Bautista portrays him in this because he is very childlike
Yes.
and mercurial.
Yeah, that's
and then has these giant emotional outbursts.
yeah, that was the thing for me that I latched onto as well, where I was like, oh, he's playing this because this guy's kind of like an enormous violent idiot, right? He's sort of playing him like a child, which I really enjoyed. And even the emotional outbursts feel like kind of like childlike, right? Like a temper tantrum, right? I love it. Excited to see more of this performance in the next installment.
And Stellan Skarsgård is awesome.
Yeah, as he generally is. It's very funny because he's simultaneously, and part of it is like the prosthetics that they have on him. But part of it is just, Stellan Skarsgård acting, right? He sort of disappears into this performance a little bit. And then every once in a while, he'll say something and I'll be like, that was so Stellan Skarsgård. Like, it's very interesting how he's simultaneously very recognizable in this. And also at the same time, you're like, but he like his mannerisms and his look is so different from how you're used to seeing him. It's a very interesting performance for him.
Yeah.
And I really like it.
Yeah, the character in the books is a very problematic character by modern standards in a lot of ways, because he's described he's evil because he's really fat.
Yeah.
And he's also a child predator in the books, which this movie wisely does not make reference to.
Yes, in the books he is explicitly a pedophile. Yeah.
But he has this this technology called suspensors that allow him to sort of float because he is so fat. And I love the way the movie portrays that, where it's like this piece of machinery that is like fused onto his back.
Yeah.
And he kind of uses it as an intimidation thing. It kind of glows and rumbles at points. It's great.
Yeah. There's something really fun about a flying fat guy.
Yeah. This Gady Prime scene specifically also introduces us to the spider.
Which, okay. We can't spend the rest of this episode talking about the spider.
Yeah.
But this is fucking wild. It's
so you've read one Dune book.
Yes.
I've read 6 Dune books.
Yeah.
I don't know what this fucking thing is.
It's not from the books. It's Denis Villeneuve and company invented this for the movie, and you know what? Great fucking edition.
It's so cool.
10 out of 10 no notes on this edition that was not part of the book, because this thing, it's got human hands, it's got thumbs, right? And yeah, it looks like a big old, it looks like if you fused a human being, as if we are in David Cronenberg's The Fly, or the 1950s Fly that's based on. If a person got into one of those pods, and then a spider was in the other pod, and then they came out and put on a gimp suit.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was exactly going to say. I was like, if he doesn't bring up gimp suit, I'm going to say gimp suit.
Yeah. It's fucking crazy.
It also understands humans.
Yes.
It understands human speech. There's a point where either Piter or the Baron say, it can't understand us.
Yes, it's Pitter, because I love the David Dastmalchian delivery. Our pet can't understand our language. Your language.
Yeah, and then the Reverend Mother says, "Get out," in the voice, and then it wanders
and
off.
she goes, "It understands."
Yeah. There's theories that this is supposed to be Dr. Yue's wife.
Yes, who has been taken hostage.
Yeah, she's been taken hostage by the Harkonnens and tortured. This will come into play later.
Yeah.
But she's not a character that's very prominent in the books.
Yes.
So people are theorizing that is what the spider is supposed to be.
Yeah, they turned her into a gimp spider.
Yeah.
I think that theory is lame and dumb, and I think just let the spider be the spider.
You just want it to be a gimp spider?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. That's my feelings on that. Do you like that theory? It's okay if you do.
I respect that that point of view.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily buy into the theory super heavily, just because I don't know the details enough. I'm hoping we get more Gimp Spider in the second one. I would love more Gimp Spider.
Yeah. this is just what the ancestors of the human centipede doctor have been doing 20,000 years in the future. We've moved on from human centipedes to human gimp spider. Anyway, so yeah, in this scene, basically what's happening is like the Reverend Mother, played by Charlotte Rampling, and then Peter de Vries and Baron Harkonnen are all sort of talking about this plot that they're all in on, right? So here is where we, as the viewer, get confirmation that the Emperor is working with the Harkonnens, and the whole thing of the Atreides taking over Arrakis is a setup that's coordinated by the Harkonnens and the Emperor together to essentially make Duke Leto fail, and eventually lead to his demise. So they're kind of plotting together to get rid of Duke Leto. And it's because Duke Leto is like too powerful, too popular. The Emperor feels threatened and he wants this guy gone. But it would be too it would be a problem if he like waged war on him directly, right? Because then some of the other they call them the Great Houses, but it's basically the other kingdoms, right, that are under the Empire. Some of them would take issue with that if the Emperor just fucking waged war on this guy directly. So he's got to like do it in a sneaky way, is the whole thing.
And the Bene Gesserit want the Baron to leave Jessica and Paul alive because they have plans for them.
Right.
I love the cone of silence.
Yes,
that they use.
Yes,
which is something from the books.
Yes, they call it the cone of silence in the book, and it's not described what a cone of silence is or how it works. So this was totally like up to the creators of the film to determine how they wanted to interpret that, and the way they do it is the best possible option, because the Reverend Mother says activate silence, and then just this fucking like spotlight, cone-shaped spotlight pops up just around the area where they're all sitting, and everything outside of it is muffled, and then when you go inside you can hear perfectly clearly, and I'm like, that is, and it looks like an actual cone.
Yeah.
And it fucking rules. It's so good. It rocks so hard.
I love it. I also love at the end of the scene after the Reverend Mother leaves, the Baron is talking with Piter about I said I won't harm them. I won't harm the boy and the mother, and I will not. But Arrakis is Arrakis, and the desert takes the weak. And then his suspensors start activating, and he floats into the air with this super long cloak that descends all the way to the ground, specifically for situations in which he needs to fly up in his suspensors to be intimidating. And he delivers, "My desert, my Arrakis, my Dune." It's so cool, and it's like they add a voice effect. And I don't know if it's like a piece of technology that he has or something. It sounds awesome though.
I agree. Great moment, fucking rocks. Also, with the Harkonnen voice modulation, he's Stellan Skarsgård isn't the only one who has it. Some of the Harkonnens have sort of like orc voices. And also the Sardaukar as well. And it's such an interesting thing in this movie to kind of take that almost like fantasy angle, right? Because there's nothing in universe that is explained as to why some of these people just sound like monsters in this movie, but I think it totally works. Like, it's like I as a viewer never was like questioning it. I was like, okay, that's just what those guys sound like. And it does make them effectively like more intimidating and shit. So I'm like, yeah, fuck it.
It absolutely does. We'll talk about it a little bit more when we get to the first scene where we see the Sardaukar, because that's a great scene as well. A short scene that happens here is Duncan Idaho comes back with Stilgar, who is the leader of the Fremen. Stilgar meets Duke Leto, and Leto wants to form an alliance with them. There's a great scene where Stilgar spits as a sign of respect, because water is a precious commodity on Arrakis. So anything that expends moisture is seen as either, it's a very precious and meaningful act to do that. And he spits on a table and everyone freaks out. And then there's a very funny moment where Jason Momoa is like, "Thank you, Stilgar, for the gift of your body's moisture," and he spits, and then Duke Leto spits.
Yeah, it's also funny when Duke Leto spits because Oscar Isaac kind of like hawks up like a little bit of a loogie
Yeah.
to spit. He's like, which I like.
But the main thing that happens in this next scene is the spice harvester scene.
Yes. Yeah. We'll go back to Stilgar later because I do want to talk about Javier Bardem, but let's put a pin in that and
Yeah.
we'll talk Spice Harvester. Yes. So they're basically gonna go out to check on the spice operation now that Duke Leto is in charge of it. The person who's gonna be their tour guide is Dr. Liet Kynes, which in the book, Dr. Liet Kynes is a male character, right? And in the movie, they've gender swapped Liet Kynes, so this is a woman. A decision that a lot of fucking dumbass nerds on the internet had a problem with. A decision which I think totally works.
Yeah.
I do think what they do with Liet Kynes in this movie does fundamentally change the role that character has in the story. And I think it's as good as the version in the book. Because basically in the book, at least this was my interpretation. I don't want to spend too much time on Liet Kynes. But basically in the book, my interpretation is like, this is he's essentially a white guy, a white colonizer, right? Who decides that he relates more to the native culture than he does to the culture that he's from, right? And attempts to integrate himself as effectively as possible, right? And ultimately, his sort of arc and his eventual demise in the book, to me, represents that it's like, you thought that because you immersed yourself into this culture, you weren't an outsider in this place. But his kind of ultimate fate to me in the book is like, but you still actually are. You still sort of don't belong here, right? And he has a conversation with the ghost of his father. I'm not going to get all in the weeds about it, but he's basically rejecting that idea outwardly. But then to me, the way that his fate is sealed kind of is like, yeah, but like you fell in love with the desert, but you're not of the desert, you know? I sort of think that the way this movie handles Liet Kynes is kind of the opposite, right? Where they keep her origin a little bit more vague, right? And it's like, maybe she truly is Fremen, right? And her eventual demise in the way it's different from how he dies in the book, right? To me, kind of reads the opposite way, where it's like, oh no, she is more Fremen than she is outsider, right? And yeah, I thought it was an interesting thing that they did.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, because my memory of Kynes in the book is pretty sparse.
Yeah.
But I think you're absolutely right. I think Sharon Duncan Brewster, who
Yes.
plays the character in this movie, does a great job with the role.
She's so fantastic in this movie.
Yes. We get the scene where they're fitted with still suits, which is a suit that allows you to recycle your body's moisture while you're out in the deep desert.
Yeah.
It does not mention that you can poop and pee in it.
Yes.
The movie does not mention that you can poop and pee in a still suit.
Yes.
And I need to just take Denis to task with that. I wanted a balisay. We don't get a balisay, and I want to know that we're pooping and peeing in these still suits.
And that the water that you are drinking from your still suit is recycled water from, yes, your sweat and tears and saliva, but also your pee-pee and your poo-poo.
I want a still suit that recycles my pee-pee and poo-poo into beer. I want a beer still suit.
A beer still suit. And there's like pods where you like insert fucking yeast and malt and hops. Yeah. Yeah.
But we have to talk about the spice harvester scene.
Yeah. So yeah, they go fly in the ornithopter to a spice harvesting operation, and we see this big ass vehicle, the spice harvester, out in the desert, and they're mining spice from the sand. Liet Kynes is explaining worm sign, which is basically this indication on the surface, these dust clouds that let you know that a sandworm is coming, right? And Leto spots some worm sign. He's like that over there? And she's like, yeah, good eyes. And so then they call the spice harvester and they're like, yo, there's a worm coming. And the spice harvester is like, who the fuck is this? Which I love. And
I wanted to see in that spice harvester?
what?
It's me, David Lynch!
Yes, because he drives the harvester in his version. It'd be so funny if he had a voice cameo as the spice harvester driver in this.
Yeah.
If Oscar Isaac had been like, worm sign spotted, fucking however many meters away from your location, and he'd been like, hello
This is David Lynch. Who is this?
Who is this?
This is Duke Leto Atreides. Who?
Sorry. This is Gordon Cole with the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
I took a job on this spice harvester because federal employment isn't paying what it used to. My wages haven't been keeping up with inflation, so I had to get a side hustle as the driver of this spice harvester. I was able to transport myself 20,000 years in the future by going to the Black Lodge.
Yeah. Anyway, it's not David Lynch on the spice harvester, unfortunately. So, Oscar Isaac is basically like, wow, they seem really chill, right? And they're like, yeah, they're gonna harvest spice till the last minute, right?
Yeah, basically what happens is the sandworms are attracted to the sounds and the vibrations of spice harvesting, and what happens is they have this this ship called a carryall that attaches itself to the spice harvester and carries the spice harvester back to Arrakis.
Yeah.
And they harvest spice up until the last minute to get as much spice as possible.
Yeah. I love the fucking design of the carryall. Cause like the top of it has these there's like 4 huge balloons on top. And it's sort of like a hot air balloon, right? Or like a Zeppelin or whatever, right? Where it's got, these like 4 big inflatable things, right? And then it's got the little arms that it like shoots out to grab onto the spice harvester. It's just, the design is really rad.
I love the design of the harvesters too.
Yeah.
The harvesters are somewhere between like the Jawa sandcrawler from Star Wars and the launch vehicle of the space shuttle.
Yeah.
And it's awesome.
Yeah,
They're huge. They have these giant treads. There's plumes of smoke and dust that billow out the back of this thing.
Yeah.
I think it looks great. The visual effects are amazing in this movie.
Hey, Denis, I just saw your Dune Part 1 there, man, and I gotta be honest with you, I'm noticing some similarities between that spice harvester and a certain Jawa sandcrawler.
Yeah.
And also, you know what, buddy? I noticed that you gave the ornithopters 4 wings that are sort of in an X formation. You might even call them X-shaped wings, Denis. You might wanna watch your fucking back, man, or I'm gonna have lawyers on your ass before you fucking know it.
I don't have a Lucas joke for that one. You got it. You nailed all of them. You hit all the points I wanted to hit. This carryall shows up, and one of the arms fails, so they're not going to be able to carry the spice harvester out.
Yes. Great urgency in this scene. Great tension.
Yes.
The score is doing a lot of work to escalate it.
Leto's immediately like, okay, forget about the spice. We're going to go in. We're going to save as many people as possible. I want to talk about my experience watching this movie for the first time, because this is about an hour into the movie.
Yeah.
I was watching the movie, and it was just kind of like passing through me. Not that I wasn't engaged, but I wasn't really able to comprehend what I was seeing. It was just, movie is happening, and I'm sitting in a theater watching Dune for the first time.
Mm.
There's a moment where Duke Leto decides to go after the spice harvester, and the wings of the ornithopter fold back to give him a chance to build up some speed.
Yeah.
He goes into a dive, and then the wings redeploy at the bottom of the dive, and the ornithopters go after the spice harvester.
Yeah.
That was the moment where I was fully locked into the movie.
Yeah, it kicks so much ass.
It happened last night too. It happens every time. This is also a really memorable scene in the book. Even
Yeah.
the first time when I read it,
Yeah.
this is a great scene from the book.
I think this is where the book really, really hooked me for
Yeah.
sure. Where I was like, "Oh fuck, I love this."
and I'm happy to say that they knocked this scene out of the park.
It literally captures everything that is so great about this scene in the book perfectly, in my opinion. Yeah, so they take the ornithopters down, they land. Basically, the plan is we're gonna get all the human beings off the spice harvester, so that when this worm comes and gobbles it up, we'll have at least saved all the human life, even though all the spice will be, fucking lost.
Yeah.
So they're yelling at the guys, telling them to load up on the ornithopters. Paul gets off to like help direct them to the right ones. And he breathes in some spice for the first time, right? He gets, the sand is being kicked up, and this is like a spice-rich field that they've been mining. So he just gets a fucking base full of this shit, and he starts tripping balls and seeing the future.
Yeah, this is his spice awakening.
Yes.
And while the worm is coming, which, by the way, the worms in this movie are so well depicted.
Yeah.
As you just see mountains of sand moving and plumes of dust and sand explode, and the rumble, the sound design's magnificent.
Yeah. You really get the majesty of these things.
Yeah.
Where they feel, because the Fremen worship them as gods,
Mhm.
they feel godlike.
Mhm.
It feels like this is something, not only is this a giant creature, but also there is something, that there's sort of a reverence to how they're like a reverence and a majesty to how they're depicted. That feels like you get why the Fremen think that they're God.
Yeah.
It rocks. Yeah. So they notice that Paul hasn't come back to the ship, because he's kind of like over by the spice harvester, tripping out and seeing the future, right? So then Gurney Halleck comes to get him. I do like the little detail here where earlier Gurney Halleck comes up behind Paul before the training sequence, and Gurney Halleck's like, "Oh, you shouldn't have your back to the door," and he's like, "Well, I recognize your footsteps." And Gurney Halleck gives him shit for it. And then in this scene, Gurney's coming up behind him as he's like in his spice trance, and he just kind of goes, "I recognize your footsteps, old man," because he knows it's Gurney coming up behind him before he even sees him. And it's just a cool little callback. Yeah.
And then as Gurney and Paul are running back to the ornithopters, the worm gets very close.
Yeah.
And they trip and fall in the sand, and the sand starts like pooling up around them and displacing and becoming almost liquid, which is a real thing that can happen.
Yep.
And it looks fantastic.
It looks so cool. There's a lot of photography in this movie of just sand moving.
Yeah.
And it always looks fucking gorgeous.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. So the worms come in, they're kind of sinking into the sand. They end up getting to the ornithopter and like are saved at the last minute. Basically, they jump on the ramp and fly away just as the worm is surfacing to gobble up the sand. I almost said sand crawler. I'm gonna get sued by
You
George
say
Lucas.
Sandcrawler, you're gonna owe me $10,000, you motherfucker.
But yeah, it emerges to eat the spice harvester, and it looks fucking incredible.
This like nest of teeth
Yeah.
opens up from the ground.
Yeah.
And it swallows this spice harvester. In the foreground, we see Gurney and Paul hanging off the end of the ornithopter as it's happening. It's probably the best scene in the movie.
Yeah. It's definitely up there at least.
And it's fucking fantastic.
Yes, and as much as I love this and think it's a perfect scene, also that sandworm mouth emerging out of the desert does kind of look like a giant butthole.
Yes.
So that's not a negative, that's not a critique. I think it's the most majestic, amazing giant butthole I've ever seen put to screen, but it kind of looks like a giant butthole. But a giant butthole that I would not want to be swallowed up by. As opposed to a giant butthole that I would want to be swallowed up by. Not sure what I meant by that.
Yeah. There's a brief vision here that Paul has. He explains his vision to that he had while out there in the sand to Jessica.
Yeah.
Where he envisions meeting the girl on Arrakis, and she stabs him.
Mm-hmm.
So the Chris knife, which is a sacred knife to the Fremen people.
Yeah.
It's
made out of a worm tooth.
Made out of a worm tooth, the tooth of Shai-Hulud. The Chris knife becomes a recurring image in his visions.
Yeah.
And he also knows that Jessica is pregnant.
Yes.
And Jessica has not told anyone. But then we go to Solusa Secundus.
Yeah.
Which is the imperial the imperial planet.
Yes.
In the galaxy. And we meet the Sardaukar.
Yes.
So the Sardaukar are the Emperor's soldiers.
Yes.
And we're introduced to this scene by a dude on a podium throat singing.
Yes, he is like it's like a guy is at the top of an air traffic control tower, but there's no like enclosure on the top of the tower. He's just kind of standing up there, but it is kind of like this big tower. Yeah, and he's doing throat singing and doing some shit with his hands. It is simultaneously like it's not confusing, but it is contextless, right? Where you're just like, it's just kind of up to my imagination what the fuck this guy's deal is, like what this is all
this
about.
This movie's really good about treating the weirder elements of this universe as normal, and also just throwing you into them and being like,
deal with
fuck you, we're doing throat singing now. Either you're on board or you're not.
The other thing that I love in this scene that is weird and never explained, but also doesn't need to be explained because it fucking just rocks as a visual, is there's all of these people. So there's the Sardaukar. This is some kind of ceremony. I think it might be a graduation ceremony for the Sardaukar, where it's like, you're officially Sardaukar now, right?
Yeah, they're like marking their foreheads with blood.
Yeah. So it's Sardaukar commencement.
Yeah.
But the blood that they're marking their foreheads with, there's all of these people who are kind of like, there's like kind of this slope of like stone, and they're chained upside down, like on this slope, and their blood is just trickling into, they've been like cut or something, and their blood is just trickling into like a gutter that they're filling these bowls from to like mark these dudes' heads. It's such a rad visual.
Yeah, it's so fucking metal.
It goes so hard,
and it's raining, so the water's mixing in with the blood.
Yeah.
It's pretty rad.
And
I think this movie may have been R at one point.
Yeah,
because these guys have like underwear on. These guys that are upside down, and I feel like that may have been painted on in post. I feel like we may have had some naked dudes in this movie otherwise.
Yeah, I think you're probably right about that. I also sort of think that because we've seen some of the trailers stuff in some of the trailer stuff for Dune Part 2, that the Fade Routh scene where he's introduced and he's doing his fight is in black and white. I'm wondering if that is similarly like one of the reasons, in addition to it's aesthetically cool, that scene's in black and white, is maybe because there's going to be some blood in that scene, some gore in that scene that would pop that up to an R if it wasn't in black and white. But we'll see.
Yeah, well, and the shield effects, that when the people have their shields on and something penetrates the shield, it shifts from blue to red.
Yeah,
and that's kind of like a replacement for blood.
Yeah.
And there's a really great replacement for blood in the scene where Kynes dies that we'll talk about too.
Yeah.
But this guy's fucking going ham, throat singing.
Yeah.
And then
he's doing his freestyle.
Piter is there to talk to the leader of the Sardaukar.
And David Dastmalchian playing Pitter in this scene is hilarious because he's so out of his element with the Sardaukar. Like, this guy is like towering over him and he's like, "What do you want with the fucking Sardaukar?" But he's like speaking Sardaukar, which is a very scary sounding language. And Pitter's like, "Well, with 3 battalions as agreed." Right? He's just kind of like, "Please don't hurt me, you fucking giant monster of a man."
Yeah, this is another place where Denis decides to just make the bad guys sound like monsters.
Yes.
And there's kind of some like weird, there's a disconnect between the voice and the guy's mouth movements.
Yeah.
Like it's dubbed and then there's some sort of vocal effect put on it, but it's not done very well. And I kind of like it.
Yeah.
It kind of makes him a little bit more mysterious
and
intimidating.
Like, what
and
is
also
the deal with this guy.
He's a guy with a face. He's got a
Oh,
great
yeah.
face.
Oh yeah. He's just very imposing and strange to look at. But yeah, so they basically chat through their little business deal here, where David Dastmalchian's like, yeah, you give us the 3 battalions or whatever, and the Sardaukar guy is basically like, yeah, we'll get the job done. Anybody who goes up against the Sardaukar fucking dies.
Yeah.
So you got nothing to worry about. And so brief scene on Seleucus Secundus, but we had to spend some time on it because it's one of the most rad visuals in this entire movie.
There's a brief scene between Jessica and Duke Leto. It's one of the few scenes that they have together where before the scene, like you mentioned earlier, Rebecca Ferguson is crying and trying to hold in a lot of emotions and stuff like that. And she goes to talk to Leto about Paul. And Leto's very concerned about her motives and whether she's going to be loyal to House Atreides or she's loyal to the Bene Gesserit.
Yeah.
And a great little scene between the two of them. We haven't talked about Oscar Isaac a ton. Oscar Isaac's great.
Yeah, as he generally is. He's one of my faves.
Yeah.
I love Oscar Isaac a lot, and I think he's perfect casting for this role.
Yeah, perfect fit for the role.
Yeah.
And this also gets around something that happens in the books, where in the book we know the plans to we know the plan and the conspiracy to dismantle House Atreides from the first chapter where it's introduced. We know about it for a very long time.
Right.
We know how it's going to happen. We know who's going to betray them. How that element of the book is able to generate conflict and intrigue out of the reader is House Atreides is also trying to figure out who's betraying them, and there's a lot of mistrust between members of House Atreides, both the family members and their court, I guess. So they're trying to figure out who it is, but we know the whole time, and that creates some tension and creates some intrigue.
Yeah.
And I think this scene does a really good job of just condensing it really quickly, where it's like we get the sense that there's some tension in House Atreides going on over the future, over Paul, over what's going to happen, but we're not dwelling on it too much, so that way we can surprise the audience a little bit more with the fall of House Atreides, which is coming up in this next moment.
Right. Yeah. And so speaking of that next moment, everybody goes to bed. There's a sweet little moment with Oscar Isaac and Rebecca Ferguson where he's like kind of falling asleep in her lap. It's very, very sweet and endearing. And Timothée is snoozing away, and somebody is up to no good in the palace at night. And so Leto gets woken up by there's like some light flashing on his wall, and he looks out the window and sees that it's a light like across the city that's like blinking like Morse code, right? And immediately he's like, oh, this is someone is doing a secret code and I'm in danger and my family's in danger, right? So he immediately like leaves the room and starts like looking around. He finds we didn't talk about her earlier scene, but there's a character called Shut Out Mapes, who is a Fremen who works in the Atreides household, right? She's like one of their servants that they get when they move to Arrakis. And she has like a moment with Lady Jessica earlier, but because we don't want this episode to be 4 hours long, we're not going to talk over the entire thing. He finds her dead, right? And so he now for sure knows something's up. And right as he is going to spring into action, he gets shot with a fucking poison dart and gets paralyzed.
A poison dart that is able to penetrate his shield.
Yes, because it
passing
goes
slowly.
Yes, because it goes slow once it hits the shield, which I like. I like that shot of it, like slowly going into him.
Yeah. And it's revealed that Dr. Yue
Yeah.
has betrayed them.
Yes.
Because the Harkonnens have his wife.
And she might be a gimp spider.
We don't know. Yeah. But he cut a deal with the Baron that if he delivers Duke Leto to the Baron, then he will free his wife. There's a moment that happens later in this sequence where Yue installs a poison false tooth
Yes.
in Duke Leto's mouth.
Remember the tooth.
Remember the tooth. Because Yue's hope is that Leto's going to get close enough to the Baron that he can crush the tooth and breathe out the poison and kill the Baron in the room.
Yes.
That's his plan to get back at the Baron. But the rest of the fall of House Atreides happens in
Yeah.
the meantime, and this is an amazing sequence.
Yep.
As the Atreides soldiers wake up, they run out to the airfield and they see these Harkonnen ships descending through the atmosphere, and they land on the airfield. And Gurney Halleck's out there with them. He kills a couple of guys,
The
and then
fucking bagpipes kick back in.
he shouts "with me," and they all start charging, and the bagpipes come back.
Yeah.
Amazing stuff. We haven't talked about the score.
Yeah.
Should we talk about the score now?
Sure. Yeah.
Hans Zimmer crushes it.
Yeah. It's incredible.
It's amazing shit.
Yeah.
Hans Zimmer, I think he, has his, he rests on his laurels in some scores.
Yeah.
He does what people expect him to. I think he's rightly criticized for it in many cases. I think he put his whole pussy into the Dune score.
I completely agree. I think that this is an S tier Hans Zimmer score. Yeah, he really it's colossal and epic and all the things that you need it to be for this movie. The influences from Middle Eastern music when they come through are very cool and fit the tone and the aesthetic of the thing. And also like some of the more orchestral stuff, some of the like big droning stuff that he does as well. Like all that shit's great. Yeah, it's fucking rad.
It really puts the opera in space opera for this movie, I think.
It does.
It sells the high drama and emotions
Yeah.
of its most powerful sequences.
Yeah, like the scale of this thing.
Yeah.
Is reflected big time in the music.
Absolutely.
It fucking rocks. And what also fucking rocks is all of the fucking special effects in this Fall of House Atreides sequence. There's like the Harkonnen bombs, which they're dropping onto like the Atreides ships, and they like hit the shields of the ships and then slowly move through the shield. So like the shield turns red and then the bomb goes through the shield and hits the thing and it explodes.
And they explode kind of within the shield.
Yeah.
And then
the shield
it
like breaks.
and then the explosion spreads out.
Yeah. House Atreides has like some missile turrets that they start shooting back with.
Yeah, I love the turrets.
Yeah, the turrets are great. There's a really, really cool, it's later in this sequence, but there's a really, really cool visual of one of the Harkonnen ships is kind of hovering above the battlefield, and it shoots out like 600 missiles at once. Like it's just like shoots out like a huge barrage of missiles, and the entire ground below, like because they're just bombing the city, like the whole city just starts burning. It's fucking rad.
Yeah, it's beautiful. That shot in particular is gorgeous.
Yeah, we also, speaking of gorgeous shots here, we also get one of my favorite shots of the movie, which is there were some date palm trees that were introduced in a previous scene. These are like sacred palm trees that grow outside of the palace, right? And it's like hard to keep them alive. They make a whole big deal about this. During the Harkonnen invasion, the palm trees get lit on fire. And one of my favorite shots of the movie is kind of, there's like an overhead aerial shot of a bunch of people like fighting in the background, and closer to the foreground of the shot, you just see the tops of these palm trees ablaze, and it rocks.
And Dave Bautista is there like executing prisoners.
Yeah, he's like cutting dudes' heads off. Yeah.
And I think this is another one of those things that maybe this movie was R at one point, because it gets kind of blurry when he starts the focus on the image.
Yeah.
Blurs a little bit when he starts cutting dudes' heads off as these palm trees are just casting a glow around the area.
Yeah.
We get a really dope sequence of Jason Momoa fighting dudes in the palace.
Yep.
There's a really kick-ass moment where someone shoots another dart at him, and as it passes through his shield really slowly, he like deflects it with his sword.
Yeah.
It's kick-ass.
It fucking rocks. The fight choreo here is also, the choreo in this movie is not super showy. It's not super flashy.
Yeah.
It's like really fast and efficient and reads very realistically as combat, right? It doesn't look like movie combat. It kind of looks like more like how real martial arts sometimes look. And I think it's very effective and very cool. So all the fighting here looks pretty rad as well.
Yeah, there's a big fight on the staircase of the palace where the Harkonnens march march towards a battalion of Atreides soldiers, and then the Sardaukar deploy behind the Atreides soldiers. They just sort of like drift down from their ships.
Mm-hmm.
And an important detail from the books that this movie ignores is that in the book, the Harkonnens and the Sardaukar are all dressed as Harkonnens,
Right, because
to hide the fact that the Emperor's involved.
Right.
They don't do that in the movie.
Yes. I think, and in the movie, I think they sort of intend for, because they'll probably play with this in Dune Part 2, so it'll be interesting to see what they do.
Yeah.
Whether people like know that the Emperor's involved or not. But like if the Emperor's not involved, I kind of think the rationale on the movie side is basically like, well, everybody who saw one of those guys is either dead or presumed dead, right? So it's basically like, yeah, we didn't have them dress as Harkonnens because nobody survived, is sort of maybe the idea, but we'll see.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, so as this huge sequence is happening, Paul and Jessica get captured by some Harkonnens, and they get taken on an ornithopter, like they're on a ship, being flown out into the desert, right? Because the plan with them is basically like, well, we made a promise to the Bene Gesserit not to kill him, so let's just dump him in the desert and let the desert kill him for us.
Yeah.
And as this is happening, also Duncan Idaho eventually gets in an ornithopter and flies away as well.
Yeah, there's a scene where like there's a laser beam that's sort of tracking his ornithopter, and it destroys this building around him as he's trying to escape, and he's flying through the wreckage of the city.
Yeah,
it's kick-ass.
Yeah, some fun spaceship action. But yeah, so Paul and Jessica on this ship with these Harkonnens are trying to figure out how they're gonna get out of it. They've put a gag over Jessica's mouth so she can't use the voice on them. This is maybe a good scene for us to briefly talk about how the voice is handled in this movie.
Yeah.
Because this is the first, it's been used in the movie already, but this is kind of the first scene that focuses very heavily on usage of the voice. How do you feel about how it's done in the movie?
Hey, Frank Herbert, you know that voice you had? What if the Jedis use that, huh? What if I had Alec Guinness use that in my Star Wars movie? And he uses it to trick some stormtroopers, huh? And we'll call it a Jedi mind trick.
It's different because he waves his hand, see?
Yeah.
So because he's doing the little hand wave, guess what? You don't have a leg to stand on.
And it only works on the weak-minded. And also floating dragons that are Jewish stereotypes and giant slug monsters that run criminal empires. It's immune. They're immune to it as well. So it's totally different, Frank. Try to sue me, you little bitch. Just try. I'll fucking bury you in the sand. I'll bury you on Arrakis, you little punk.
Speaking of big fat crime lords who mind tricks don't work on, hey, I got your cease and desist for my Jabba the Hutt character because he bears a striking resemblance to Baron Harkonnen, but this guy's a Hutt. He's an alien. So even though he's big and fat and he has to float around in order to move, and he has a stranglehold on a desert planet because he made so much money smuggling something that is totally coincidentally called spice, it's totally different because he's a big green alien. Honestly, Frank, I've never even heard of this Baron Harkonnen guy. Jabba the Hutt is a George Lucas original, buddy.
Now shut the fuck up and watch this CGI nightclub song that I'm gonna add back into Return of the Jedi. Because I'm George Lucas, motherfucker.
Sure, Jabba the Hutt is a sex pervert and Baron Harkonnen is also a sex pervert, but we both know that's just how big fat guys are, Frank. It's just parallel thinking, man.
I like that George Lucas is now gaslighting Frank Herbert. Anyway, we were talking about the voice.
Yeah. Yes.
How do you feel about how they do the voice in the movie?
I think it's great.
I think it's great too.
I was reading the book the other night. I was actually reading this scene in particular.
Yeah.
And the way, also there's tons of details in this scene down to like the green light.
Yeah.
From the instrument panel of the ornithopter that are ripped straight from the books, and I thought that was really cool.
Yeah.
But the sound of the voice is pretty close to how it's described in the books. It's very animalistic, and otherworldly.
Yeah.
And there's like multiple voices in there.
Yeah. And it sounds kind of like creepy and like demonic.
Yeah.
Which I think is cool and fun.
Yeah.
That it doesn't like, it's not pleasant to hear, you know? But yeah, so they've gagged Jessica so she can't use it on them. So Paul tries using the voice. One of the Harkonnens is deaf, so that presents a challenge to them using the voice, right? Because it's not going to work on that guy. So Paul tries using the voice, basically being like, take off her gag. And initially it doesn't work. And I love this Harkonnen. So initially he says something not using the voice. He just like is talking shit and he gets like smacked or whatever. But then he tries using the voice, and I love this Harkonnen just standing up and going over to him like he's almost about to do it, like the voice worked. And then he just turns and fucking socks Timothée Chalamet in the gut so fucking hard. Just like plants his entire fist like fully in like his breadbasket, and I was like, fuck, like that. He's gonna be feeling that in his balls.
There's another detail to this scene that detail to this movie that we haven't talked about, because there's a billion fucking things to talk about in this movie. From the books, they have different languages.
Yeah.
There's like the Atreides battle language,
Right.
which is something they use
Yeah.
during wartime. There's lots of different languages that they use. They have hand signals in this movie that are subtitled,
Right.
that are used in multiple parts of this movie.
Yeah.
And it's awesome. I love that detail.
Yeah.
So Jessica uses it here to tell Paul silently to adjust his pitch
Yeah.
to use the voice on these guys.
Yep. And so he does it again.
Yes.
He takes his cue from mommy, and it works this time. The guy takes the gag off of Jessica, and Jessica, who's better at the voice, is like, fucking kill that deaf guy, which he does, right? And then she says, give me the knife, and he does, and she just stabs him with it. It fucking rocks.
Yeah.
It's so good.
The Thopter lands, and it's been locked down basically.
Yeah.
So they can't use it. They find a Frem kit, which is a kit to survive in the deep desert.
Yeah.
That the Fremen make.
Yes.
It's left there by Dr. Yue. They find a symbol that they associate with Dr. Yue because it's a tattoo on his forehead.
Yep.
And that's how they find it. Another great little minor detail from the books that I love seeing in this movie.
Yep.
And they take off into the desert.
Yep. They're going off to, their plan is to find the Fremen, because they're like, well, we can't go back where we came from because there's a million bombs being dropped on everything. So into the desert to find some potential help we go.
Yeah.
And then
they get set up in a tent.
oh yeah.
And then this next sequence is intercut with we're catching up with the Baron and
Yes.
Duke Leto.
Yes.
And Duke Leto is still paralyzed, and the Baron is in the dining hall
Yes.
eating all his food.
Just slurping up this food. He is like Denethor eating
Yeah.
cherry tomatoes. Just fucking. It's fucking disgusting. Stellan Skarsgård mouth noises, and it's very good.
Sing me a song, Hobbit.
And also, sorry, now I'm just thinking about Denethor. And also in this scene, to add insult to injury, they have stripped Leto naked. So we get some real revealing side view of naked Oscar Isaac kind of passed out in this chair at the table. And what can you say other than what a hunk of beef that guy
What a
is.
snack that man
What a
is.
prime cut. But yeah, so Baron Harkonnen floats over the table. They bring in Dr. Yue, right? And Dr. Yue is like, hey, so like I did what you asked. Time for you to hold up your end of the bargain. And I really like the shot where the Baron starts flying toward Dr. Yue, because Dr. Yue is in the foreground in focus, or maybe it's like the back of Oscar Isaac's head, but the foreground is in focus and the background's out of focus, and you just see the out of focus kind of silhouette of the Baron just extend into the air, and then he flies across the table. I like how you see his feet kind of knocking into dishes and kind of like scraping across the top of the table, and he like hovers down in front of Dr. Yue, and he's like, oh yeah, so about that deal, what did I say I was going to do again? And he's like, well, you said you would release my wife from her suffering. And in this moment, both in the book and in the movie, you're kind of like, Dr. Yue, what did you think was going to happen here, dude? Like, sorry, they abducted your wife and were like, okay, you have to do this thing, and then I will release her from her suffering. Don't you think that that is suspicious wording?
It's a weird way to word that.
Don't you think that that sounds like they're maybe just going to kill her anyway? Which is, of course, what has happened.
And Stellan Skarsgård goes, "So join her."
Yeah.
And then cuts his throat.
No, okay.
Oh, wait, does he snap his neck?
He cut. Okay, this was the thing I noticed last night for the first time watching this. He does cut his throat. He cuts his throat so much that he cuts Dr. Yue's head clean off. And the reason that I know this is because he cuts his throat, there's a thump, and then the camera changes angles to where you're looking down the table and Baron Harkonnen is in the background. And the bottom of Yue's head is not visible. It's obscured by something, but you can see the top of his head and Baron Harkonnen is holding it by the hair, and then he drops it and there is a second thump. So he has cut Dr. Yue's head all the way off, which I had never noticed before.
This movie's PG-13.
Yes, yeah. It's a PG-13 decapitation, but it's still, if you watch closely, it is a decapitation.
There were people who were like, this should be R, and I
Yeah.
wasn't one of those people. I was like, I think the way that it's presented, it works well for the PG-13 rating. It makes sense for what Denny has in mind for the universe. But a lot of the book fans are like, Dune's weird and fucked up and violent, and there's a bunch of weird sex in it, so it should be R. And watching it last night, I was like, oh, this is fine. But now I'm thinking about it, and I'm like, maybe this should have been R.
It kind of would have been cool if you had fully seen him cut Dr. Yue's head off. And also seen Dave Bautista knocking some heads off earlier. Yeah. But noticing that for the first time last night, I was so delighted because I was like, oh, fuck, he doesn't just cut his throat. He fucking cuts this dude's head all the way off. It rocks.
Yeah. And then Duke Leto bites down on the tooth and says, here I am, here I remain, breathes out this poison gas. This is intercut with Paul in the tent looking through the kit that he found, the kit that he finds, and he found the ducal signet ring.
Right.
And I love that. I love that these two scenes are intercut with each other, because it's like now the future of House Atreides is preserved as the old guard of House Atreides is dying.
Yeah.
It's going to continue on.
Yeah.
Later, what happens is these guys who look like they're from Monsters Inc.
I'm glad you said
the Monsters Inc. suits.
I'm glad you said the Monsters Inc. thing too, because that's all I was thinking. They literally, look like the hazmat suits from the fucking government agency in Monsters Inc.
They enter into the dining hall with like this machine to clean the air. And then we find that the Baron has basically activated his suspensors and flown up to the ceiling as far as he can get, to get as far away from the poison as he can.
Yeah, I love that visual of him as like this like huddled little mass on the ceiling. It's really fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But now we have the scene in the tent where Paul has his vision of the future, and some great acting from Timothée Chalamet here.
Probably my favorite scene of acting from him in this movie is this tent scene.
Yeah.
I think this is the strongest moment of his performance. His performance, by the way, just to kind of briefly share my thoughts on it overall, I think he's good casting for this role. I think he's a good Paul Atreides. He is one of my least favorite performances in this movie. Even though I like it, I think that there are so many stronger performances in this movie that his ends up feeling maybe a little bit comparatively simplistic. But that being said, I think that's totally fine for this character, right? I think it's fine for this world to be a little bit more kind of vibrant in terms of characters around the edges, and for us to have our main focal point be a little bit less interesting and dynamic and charismatic, because that's sort of the role that Paul plays in the book as well. Right.
Yeah.
So this performance overall, I wouldn't say I love Timothée Chalamet's performance in this movie, but it works for it. It does what it needs to do. And in occasional moments, I really like it.
Yeah, I agree completely.
Yeah.
It's tough because he has to do half of a character arc in this movie.
Yeah. It is rough.
But and it's also a coming of age tale, so he has to grow from a child to the new Duke of House Atreides to what he's going to become in the second film.
Right, in like 2.5 hours or whatever.
So I think he does a good job making that arc very clear.
Yeah.
And in this sequence, he's having a vision of warriors fighting the Sardaukar in the future, burning bodies, fights on Caladan. There's the most dodgy looking CGI shot in this movie where we see a warrior fight all of these guys, and then the mask flips up to reveal it's him, and it kind of looks like he's Iron Man.
Yes.
It's kind of the Robert Downey Jr. Iron Man head look.
It is very much a CGI Marvel helmet. Yeah.
That's the worst looking shot in this movie.
Yeah.
And so it's basically he has this vision of, as he says, a holy war spreading across the universe like an unquenchable fire.
Yes.
And is breaking down and crying and unable to really, he's trying to process this moment of like realizing that there's going to be a war and violence carried out in his name in the future.
And he's like, he can't see a way to avoid it.
Yeah.
Is kind of the thing that's freaking him out, right? Where he's basically like, I'm looking into the future and this is all I'm seeing, right? And Lady Jessica tries to calm him down, and he like lashes out at her. I really like that moment of his performance.
He uses the voice on her. It's a really, really impactful, scary moment.
Yes.
For both for us as the audience and for Jessica, because this kind of starts her arc in the second half of the movie, in this part of the movie, where she's kind of unable to come to grips with what her son is becoming.
Right. It's sort of, and I think
it's done wordlessly in a lot of places.
Yes, it is. And I really want to emphasize how great Rebecca Ferguson is in this movie. I think she is such phenomenal casting for Lady Jessica.
Yeah.
And I love Rebecca Ferguson. I think she's phenomenal. She's
the standout performance for me in this.
Yes. Just sidebar about how much I love Rebecca Ferguson. A movie that we may eventually do on the podcast, Dr. Sleep. She plays the villain in that, whose name is Rose the Hat, and it's a direct thing from the Stephen King book that character wears the stupidest fucking hat you've ever seen, and she is simultaneously supposed to be extremely terrifying and intimidating while wearing this fucking dumbass hat. And Rebecca Ferguson in that movie somehow pulls it off. Her performance in that movie is so good that it is more powerful than the dumbass fucking hat that they have her wear the entire time. So that really endeared her to me as an actress in general. And Dune has very much continued that, where I'm like, what a fucking powerhouse.
I'll also shout out, she's amazing in the Mission Impossible series. She's in the 5th one, and then she had a role in the most recent one. And fucking awesome. I would love it if she blew my head off with a sniper rifle from 500 yards away.
We love Rebecca Ferguson.
Yes.
And she's great here in this scene in the tent. She's also great later when you were talking about her kind of reckoning with those wordless moments of her performance where she's like basically it's the thing from earlier where she's like conflicted between how do I be a mother and a Bene Gesserit, and these kind of are coming into conflict with each other. Later in the movie, it's basically like, oh, the Bene Gesserit part of this is sort of winning, where it's like he is the Kwisatz Haderach probably, and you can kind of see her be like, I'm not sure that this is actually what I wanted. Right? It's like she did this. She is responsible for making him the way he is. Right? But you can see her kind of be like, I kind of wish I had my son back, and I don't really know who this person that he's becoming. I don't know who this is.
Yeah.
And it's really scary to her, which, a lot of it's done without dialogue, and it's fucking great.
It's so good.
Yeah. Just really quick, let's talk about Muad'Dib.
That mouse is so cute.
It's so cute.
There's a detail of its ears where you see the blood vessels in the ears and the sweat trickling down.
Yes.
And it's like gathering the sweat to eat, to drink the sweat.
Yeah.
To hydrate itself, basically, because it's the fucking desert.
Yes.
Looks completely real.
Yes.
Photoreal. Yes.
It is an incredible CGI little mouse creature here. And the thing where like gathers its sweat and then puts it in its mouth. Simultaneously, an amazing survival technique for this mouse that has evolved to exist in this very hostile environment. And also the cutest fucking thing you've ever seen while it does it. Because it's like using its little hands to like brush the moisture on its gums. And it's like, he's so adorable.
Yeah.
He's so cute. He's got a big long tail. He's got huge ears. He kind of hops around. I just wanted to mention Muad'Dib, which is what this mouse is called. That's the name of the name.
And
of the mouse.
it's a phrase that you might hear in the second movie.
You might. So yeah, then we go to the ecological testing station, and with Duncan Idaho and Liet Kynes, and basically Liet Kynes is being like, like we're gonna lay low and figure out what to do, and Lady Jessica is very much like, you need to figure out a way to get us off the planet, and Liet Kynes is like, all right, like I'll help you do that, and then Paul is like, you also have to tell the rest of the great houses, like the rest of the kingdoms in the empire, right? You need to tell them what happened here so that we can all fucking get back at the emperor for what he did to my dad, right? And Liet Kynes is like more reticent about that. She's not like, yeah, immediately. She kind of has to be talked into it a little bit. So Paul kind of takes charge here and really, for the first time, sort of becomes the Duke in this scene, where he's like, trying to convince her and sway her to do this. And eventually she does agree. And while they're having this conversation, there's the Fremen kind of in the outside area, the ecological testing station, are making spice coffee, which I do like the little piece of this that we see depicted, them kind of spitting into this space coffee maker. It kind of rules. And as they're doing this in the background, we see some Sardaukar like come over the like lip of the this big cavernous area that they're in. And then like we cut back to where the Fremen were, and they're all gone. Yeah. Because they fucking know they're being snuck up on. Yeah.
And the Sardaukar just silently descend down through this this cavernous
great
area,
visual,
and they
looks amazing.
Yeah, they start creeping across the sand floor, and then the Fremen burst up through the sand and start fighting them.
Yeah. And so then back inside, like they're all hearing the commotion. Liet Kynes is like, I got a fucking secret passageway, opens up, and Duncan Idaho realizes that, they're under attack, goes out into the hallway, opens the door, sees like the Fremen fighting the Sardaukar, and then he turns around and Paul immediately is like, oh, he's gonna like shut the door and buy us time and fight these guys and join the fight to fight these guys off. So then Paul, because like him and Duncan have, like we talked about before, they do a good job of establishing their like relationship and rapport. These guys like each other. So Paul's very upset. It's like the sweet little moment where he's like, Duncan, no!
And Duncan salutes him and closes the door.
Yeah.
And starts fighting these dudes. And takes down like 6 or 7 of them.
Yeah.
And then gets stabbed and falls down. And then more guys come in. There's this guy that has this giant laser that he's gonna use to try to bore through the door. And as Paul and Jessica and Liet are trying to leave through the passageway, and then Duncan Idaho gets back up and screams, pulls the knife out of his chest, and starts fighting these dudes again.
Yes, and the knife goes all the way through him.
Yeah.
So he pulls it all the way back out, and just has a gaping chest wound.
He's like, I gotta that salute to Paul he gives is like, see ya, buddy. I gotta pull a Boromir.
Yeah. It's fucking rad. It's fucking rad. He ends up murking like 4 more dudes after he pulls the knife out of his chest. It's really cool. But eventually he succumbs to his wounds, and that's all we see of Duncan Idaho for now.
Yes. It's also we're also approaching the end of Dr. Kynes' story arc.
Yes.
They split up. Paul and Jessica take off in an ornithopter, but we follow Dr. Kynes as she calls a sandworm with a machine called the Thumper that basically creates vibrations in the sand. And these Sardaukar show up and stab her in the back. And this is where there's a burst of water.
Yes.
And that's water for blood because the knife has penetrated the still suit.
Yes.
And the water shoots out, much like blood would squirt out, and I thought that was a really great way to get around that.
It's both genius to get around the R rating, and also there is something, especially because it is Dr. Kynes who like has this specific relationship with the Fremen where like water is so sacred to them. It is also just like so visually impactful that it is water, you know, because like water is such a precious kind of holy thing to the Fremen.
Yeah.
And seeing it spilled violently this way is like, it feels like it has more weight than blood in this moment.
I think so too. Yeah.
I think water was the right choice.
Yeah.
So yeah, she's been stabbed and she's dying. The Sardaukar kind of, you know, standing around her as she's, about to, fucking croak. And the thumper that has attracted the sandworm. So the sandworm is getting closer and she starts pounding her fist on the sand rhythmically too. And the fucking, in both the book and the movie, even though they are handled totally differently, Dr. Kynes' death is I think my favorite scene in both. And in this movie, the way they do it is she's banging on the sand, and one of the Sardaukar says, like, essentially like something like, that's what you get for betraying the emperor, or like the emperor entrusted you with this and you betrayed him, right? And her response is, I serve one master, his name is Shai Hulud. And then we get another fucking majestic desert butthole opening up beneath Dr. Kynes and the Sardaukar, and it just starts swallowing them up.
Yeah.
And then we cut away, which I love that it cuts away before you even get a really good look at the worm. Because it's like, you know what's happening. And then we're like away from the scene. It's really, really cool.
Yeah, it's great.
It's a great moment.
Great moment. It's also it's like a smaller sandworm too. It's
Yeah.
just enough to eat these 3 or 4 people.
Yeah, which they do say in the Spice Harvester scene, that they call out that one's a big one.
Yeah.
Right? So maybe this is more like a regular
Little
size one.
baby.
Yeah.
It's a little baby sandworm.
Um,
Then so we cut back to Paul and Jessica in the smaller ornithopter. It's a 2-seater. It looks different than the others.
Yeah.
It's got this like bubble canopy or this bubble cockpit. It's really cool. I love it. Anyway,
Yeah.
I could talk about the ornithopters for this whole episode.
yeah.
And they
I think it's an older model maybe because
Yeah.
it's also kind of a lemon, which
Yeah.
we'll get to.
they take off, and there's a sandstorm coming as like they see more ships in the rear view
Right.
following them.
Yeah, the
So they-
Sardaukar are chasing them down.
Yeah, they lead them into the sandstorm. This sandstorm is beautiful, by the
Yes.
way.
Yes.
This massive cloud of dust, and they get into the sandstorm, and the thopter starts spinning out of control, and the wings start failing, and the glass starts cracking, and we get like this beautiful effect across the windows
Yeah.
of the glass cracking.
Yeah.
And we get some close up of those analog dials just spinning and going haywire.
Yep.
It's really awesome. Jessica starts reciting the litany against fear again. We do cut in the middle of this to catch up with the Baron.
Yes.
We'll get to that in a second.
Yeah. We'll
But
finish the sandstorm first.
Paul like manages to get the thopter out above the sandstorm and into this glide it's a really beautiful moment where he's like above the sandstorm.
Mhm.
Some of the wings aren't working, and the whole ship is rattling, and it's like really tense and really scary, and then Hans Zimmer like puts this nice beautiful music over it too.
Yes.
It's a great moment.
Yeah.
And then the wings finally give out, and it goes into a barrel roll and crashes into the sand.
Yeah.
But let's check in with the Baron.
Yes. So while this has been happening, the Baron has been taking a little charcoal oil bath. I assume there's charcoal involved because it's pitch black, and also charcoal is supposed to like remove toxins. Also, it does sort of look like he's bathing in a huge pool of balsamic vinegar and olive oil.
It does look like that.
But yeah, so the other Harkonnens here, there's like some servants, which some of or probably because they're the Harkonnens, not servants, but slaves, in fact, would be the situation. Because that's the thing that they don't talk about really in the movie, but in the book, they're very explicit that the Harkonnens are also very involved in the slave trade. So there's some folks here who are tending to him, and Robin, Dave Bautista's character, is also there, and he's basically giving a report to this pool of salad dressing, being like we chased him into a sandstorm. There's no way anything could have survived. You know, that those storms like leave nothing living behind, right? And the Baron comes out of his pool. It's a great visual.
Yeah.
And it also just looks so fucking gross and disgusting, which is awesome. And he's like still sort of fucked up from the poison, and he's basically like, okay, good, like we don't have to worry about this anymore.
I'm like, dude, go confirm the kill.
Right? You would think that he would not be satisfied with this, but
Yeah.
for some reason he's like, okay, fine, good enough. Maybe it's, I mean, the Harkonnens did rule Arrakis for 80 years.
Yeah, and we know that Arrakis is, the desert is really deadly on Arrakis, so he's probably like right to assume it, but also confirm the kill, buddy.
Yeah. It definitely seems like it would have been prudent to at least bring back some evidence that they had in fact died.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then we're back with Paul and Jessica. They climb out of the ornithopter wreck, and basically Paul's like, we got to head right for the rocks because of the worms. And so they sandwalk, right? Which is, you know, walk without rhythm so as to not attract the worms. They do a great job both with the choreography of the sandwalk and with all of the performances of the actors who are sandwalking in this movie, not making it look like goofy horseshit, which I feel like is a real pitfall potentially with doing the sandwalk in Dune, right? Where it's like the way they shoot it from a lot of high angles and usually from behind and stuff, and they don't show too much of it at once, like uninterrupted.
Yeah.
They just show little bits of it, and I'm like, that's the way to do it. Keep us kind of far away, and mostly like the characters are existing as kind of silhouettes, right? And cut away frequently, because if you just hold a camera on an actor doing this for too long, it starts to look very stupid. But then they get to the rocks, and they're basically like, okay, we have to like find the Fremen, right? And yeah,
Paul is also starting to have visions of a Fremen in this part of the movie.
Yeah.
And there's voices telling him to follow the friend.
Yes.
This is a character named Jamis,
Yeah.
who's going to come into play here in a minute. But this vision is basically Jamis teaching him the way of the desert, the way of the Fremen.
Yeah.
And we get another great scene where he's talking about like, we have to the way we have to flow with the process.
Yes,
we have to let it.
A process cannot be understood by stopping it. Understanding must flow. Understanding must move with the flow of the process, which is the first law of Mentat.
Yes.
But in this version of Dune, it's kind of a Fremen teaching.
Yeah.
Rather
We get another great shot of
Yeah.
like that sand displacement, like the sand pooling up and becoming almost liquid.
Yeah.
Beautiful stuff.
Yep.
But basically, Paul is seeing possible futures.
Yeah.
He's experiencing possible futures, and this one is telling him to follow Jamis.
Yeah. And so then they camp out overnight on these rocks. They also change into their still suits, which many people on the internet have already had this observation. But when they're changing into their still suits, there is a moment where Timothée Chalamet takes his shirt off, and him and Rebecca Ferguson are facing away from each other. And then she kind of looks over her shoulder at him, and then like turns back around. And the look on her face is very much she's acting the thing that we talked about earlier, which is basically like, this was my darling boy, and now he's this person I don't really recognize, and like he's seeing the future, and I don't really get what's going on with him. And out of context, without knowing that that's internally what's happening, it does sort of seem like she's a little horny for her own son here.
It does. But and also, you know, it's not something I'd put past Frank Herbert,
Right. True.
to put in his books.
Yeah.
But I think the interpretation that like she's now seeing what has become of her son for the first time.
Right.
I think that's what's happening here.
Yes. So I don't think to be clear, I don't think Rebecca Ferguson is playing that she wants to fuck her own son, nor do I think that was the intent in the movie. But it has definitely been memed a little bit.
And there's a great subtle moment that shows us how Paul's prescience is awakening, where he has his back turned to her the whole time.
Yep.
His back to her the whole time. And after she looks at him and looks back, he looks back at her. So he knows that she's been looking at her.
Yep. They stay until dark because they're going to travel by night, which is what the Fremen do because it's less hot, right? So they wait until dark. And I do really like the digital effect of the twin moons on Arrakis. I like that they made it a big moon and a little moon. It's not like two moons of similar size. There's like a huge one and then kind of a little tiny one that's like it's little. It's don't speak to me or my son ever again.
Yeah,
is the visual.
And I think this is also some day for night stuff. Like it looks really good.
Yeah.
There's no stars in the sky, and I kind of just chalk that up to the atmosphere of Arrakis is just full. There's so much dust that you can't really see the night sky.
The atmosphere is so full of spice that you can't see the stars. I like that as a read on that. That's pretty rad. Which, by the way, while we're on the twin moons thing,
hey Frank, I got another cease and desist from you, but I gotta tell you, my lawyers have been looking over this, and they clearly pointed out that while you created a desert planet that your little prophet boy who can see the future lives on, and it has 2 moons, I put my little prophet boy who can see the future and has magical powers on a desert planet with 2 suns. And don't you think that that's not only completely different, but actually a little bit better?
You know what I do with all these cease and desist letters? Is I stack them up in my bathroom and I use them to wipe my ass.
I stopped buying toilet paper because in addition to all these cease and desists, I can just wipe my ass with the pages of all your shitty little books.
Anyway, so then it's nighttime. They decide to travel across some of the sand to another rock outcropping. They've seen vegetation on this other rock outcropping, and they know that vegetation doesn't grow except where Fremen tend to it. So they're basically like, if we go to where the shrubs are, Fremen will be nearby, right? So they're crossing the desert, doing the little sand walk. But then, despite the sand walk, a worm shows up, and they initially are like, okay, like, is it gonna pass? Is it gonna come this way? And it's coming this way, so they're just like, fuck it, run.
Yeah, they book it.
Yep.
And this we get our first really good look at the giant sand buttholes.
Yes.
As we see the worm emerge from the sand.
Yes.
And it kind of just looks at them.
Yeah. The mystic butthole of Shai Hulud.
Yeah. I'm not in love with the worm designs. I think it's because I've seen a lot of fan art of Dune over the years, and there's some really just inventive and creative and awesome designs of the sandworm, and this feels maybe a little bit too simplistic for me.
It is simple because essentially what we have with the sandworm, with the head of the sandworm is basically, it's like a ring of like the scaly skin that's on the outside, right? And then another ring of those kind of fiber teeth. They remind me of like whale teeth, right? Like the teeth of like a blue whale that they use to like strain the krill or whatever. It's like that type of teeth in like a big circle, and there's like multiple like rows and layers of them, right? But it is just kind of just 2 circles, right? And then the outside is kind of, this leathery, scaly skin. But it doesn't have like, they don't do much with color or, and it is sort of like kind of just the one texture, you know? So I get what you're saying. I think the simplistic design sort of works for me to the point where I don't really have any complaints about how the worms look, because there is something about the simplicity of the design and the way that they are shown in the movie, where it feels so primal and ancient, and the worms sort of match the brutalist minimalism of a lot of the architecture of this world.
Yeah, that's
right?
a good point.
where it's like, this seems like it is so old and so powerful and so like formidable just due to its scope, right? That the simplicity of its design, it's like, yeah, if it was designed any more than this, if they had over designed it, it would distract from how fucking big it is, you know? And it's like, that's the thing.
Yeah.
The thing is how big it is, right? And so I think it kind of totally works for me. I also, there are also other sandworm designs that probably would have hit just as well as this, but I kind of have no complaints about it.
Yeah, I think the scale is great as well. And, you know, to be fair, a lot of those sandworm designs go very outlandish. A lot
Yeah.
of the fan art about Dune and a lot of the criticisms that people have with this movie stem from how outlandish and fantastical and weird and strange all of the fan art is, the way the universe is depicted in the books.
Yeah.
Obviously, stuff like the Lynch film is very weird in a lot of places with this design.
Yeah, and
And
the
this-
Jodorowsky stuff that never
Yeah.
came to screen was all super weird.
And this movie takes, like you said, a little bit more of the brutalist architecture, more of a simplistic approach that I think also works for me.
Yeah.
And I think going too weird with it just wouldn't fit with Denis' style.
Yeah.
And this movie does such a good job of translating. I mean, okay, we've both read the book.
Yeah.
We can't forget that we've read the book while watching the movie.
Right.
So I don't know how this appears to someone who hasn't read the books before, but visually this movie tells the story so well
Yeah.
that I think if we had gone too outlandish with things, we would have distracted from the simplicity and the purity of how this movie tells its story, which is with the visuals, right? We're not
Yeah.
spending a lot of time setting up the history of the Imperium through exposition or anything like that, or talking about the prophecies and stuff through exposition. We're telling that story visually.
Yeah.
So I think the more simplistic visual style works, and it's still beautiful. Like,
Yes.
this is still a movie that is brimming with detail.
Yes. It's a beautiful simplicity, and it's compelling in its simplicity.
Yes.
Which, to go back to the worm, is, I talked about how it's basically two circles. It also, and this really struck me this most recent time watching it, it holds on that shot of the worm's open mouth
Yeah.
for a while. And you get like, there's a wide shot where you have Paul in the foreground standing in front of it. And then it moves to a closer shot that's basically like you're kind of in the worm's mouth. And even though there's not a lot of variation in what you're looking at in terms of like what the inside of the worm's mouth looks like, it's basically just those rows of teeth. It's such an arresting visual, right? Where it does sort of give you the feeling of, this is going to sound insane, especially to people who haven't read the book, but looking into the mouth of the worm kind of is like gazing into infinity, right?
Mhm.
It's like staring into the abyss, you know? And it does that thing that I think
Staring into the butthole.
yes,
Yes.
the butthole of the void.
The butthole of the void.
Um,
The sphincter of the unconscious. I don't know where this voice came from.
I'm not sure either, but I like it. I like this this Marianne Williamson persona that you've developed. But yeah, all that to say, I think it ties back to a thing that I think is very important, at least to me, because it was one of the most interesting parts of the book to me, which is these worms are simultaneously creatures that are if not flesh and blood, at least biological, right? They're biological animals,
Yeah.
right? But also they're kind of divine.
Well, and I think that I also feel that with how long they hold on that shot.
Yeah.
And the worm doesn't gobble them up.
Right.
And eventually it's called off by another thumper, but it
Yeah.
holds there for a while. And you get the sense that there is some sort of spiritual connection between Paul and the worm. Like,
Yes.
the worm is recognizing the spiritual quality within Paul.
Yes.
And holding there for a moment.
And the worm does kind of, it has this like thing in its throat these kind of flaps or scales or something that kind of close together, right? And it uses these to make a noise, and it is almost like it's talking to him. It does like this goo, 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 goo thing. And yeah, it's you're right. It's almost like it's saying something to him, right? Which also, just to get real weird about the worms for a second, because they're basically made of spice, and spice is the thing that makes the prescience really unlock in Paul. I'm like, it's kind of unclear in the book how much intelligence the worms do or don't have.
Yeah.
And kind of how they interact with the human characters in the world. And I'm like, there might be something where the worms kind of do understand who Paul is, because the worms might be prescient to some extent, right? Like, because they live their whole lives as kind of the creators of the spice. It's worm shit. That's what spice is, right? And they're sort of like made of this thing. I'm like, maybe they also kind of live in the past and the future at the same time. Weird thought I had about the sandworms. Anyway. But yeah, then the worm gets called off by another thumper that goes off. And Paul and Jessica are basically like, hey, that was another thumper, like somebody's nearby. And so this is where they meet the Fremen.
They meet the Fremen. They run into Stilgar again. Javier Bardem, great casting for Stilgar.
Yes, he's great in this movie. I really like Javier Bardem's performance in this movie. I like him in general.
Yeah,
he's great in this movie.
He's not in the movie a ton. I'm really looking forward to seeing him in part 2.
Yeah,
because he takes on a bigger role.
Yep. Yeah.
And but yeah, he does a really great job. And we also see Jamis here for the first time. And Jamis is very much like, let's just kill them and move on. Let's take the water from their bodies and go.
Yeah. And then I really like Timothée's reaction to Jamis being such an asshole immediately, because he's kind of taken off guard by it, because he's like, I've been having visions of this guy, and he was like my friend. He's like, why is he being such a dick? It's sort of interesting to see his reaction, like, hey, like, I had a future vision of you and you're not acting the way you're supposed to. How do I deal with this?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Stilgar says, like, hold on, like, this boy, his father had respect for me. This boy has respect for me. He's young enough to learn our ways, but the woman is too old.
Too old to begin the training.
Too old to begin the training. Not a slave boy from Tatooine, you are.
And we're not going to do the George Lucas bit again. We can't. It's enough.
It's gonna be too long.
But they're like, but the mother, right? Jessica is too old, so we're just gonna kill her, right? Mm-hmm. And I do like Jessica initially kind of tries to bargain with them here, where she's basically like, hey, if you take us off world, we'll pay you so much fucking money, like we'll make you like so rich. And he's basically like, you know, what could you possibly have to offer but the water in your bodies, right? Because it's like, for the Fremen, like, money means literally nothing. The only thing that matters, the only resource scarce enough to matter is moisture, is water, right? So he's basically like, I don't want your fucking money. I want the water in those guts. So then he like comes up to her to try and kill her, and she immediately fucking disarms him and like gets the knife on him. Yeah.
Paul also takes out a few of the other Fremen, disarms a few of the other Fremen, gets up to a vantage point and pulls out a pistol.
Yeah, that he like stole from one of the Fremen.
Yeah, to get a bead on him. And then we meet Zendaya.
Yep.
And Zendaya is like, I would have killed you. Put that little pistol away, boy.
Yeah, she's I would not have let you hurt my friends.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Stilgar's like, oh, hold on. We didn't know that you were a Sayadina.
Yes.
We didn't know that you were a weirding woman and a fighter.
Yes. I do love him saying, why didn't you say you were a weirding woman?
This is again the reference to the legends that the Bene Gesserit have put in place.
Yeah.
So there are legends about the Bene Gesserit that the Fremen have adopted into their beliefs.
Yeah.
And it is solely for the purpose of the Bene Gesserit gaining power.
Yes.
over this culture.
Yeah.
So they're like, okay, cool, you can join us.
Yeah.
But Jamis still wants blood.
Right. And
he's also like, still, she disarmed you, Stilgar, so why should I listen to you?
Right. And so he invokes the right of Amtal, which is trial by combat, and it's to the death.
Yeah. Paul also has a vision here of him being stabbed by Jamis.
Yeah.
Where we hear the voiceover, Paul Atreides must die for the Kwisatz Haderach to arise. There's a ghostly voice telling him this. I do want to call out the actor playing Jamis.
Yeah.
I'm going to butcher this man's name, and I apologize. His name is Babs Olusen Moken. Great performance from this guy.
Yes.
His line deliveries are great. He goes, "Where is the Outworlder?"
Yeah.
I love that delivery. There's moments where he's really quiet, but during the fight, he's like screaming and beating his chest.
Yeah, he's the intensity.
Yeah.
When he's in the fight with Paul, it makes this, which is we're basically at the end of the movie. It makes this otherwise sort of anticlimactic scene that we're ending this movie on, because it's only half of a story, it turns it into an effective climax because he's so intense. So yeah, I think his performance is a big part of this working, as kind of the final set piece of this movie.
Yeah. He says, "May thy knife chip and shatter," which is returned with Paul doing the Atreides salute.
Yeah.
And Paul easily, dispatches him a couple times and holds the knife at his throat and asks,
Do you yield?
Do you yield? And Jessica says to Stilgar, like, Paul's never killed a man before.
Yeah, I also really like Stilgar during one of those moments where he's asking Jamis to yield, because originally, or the first time he does it, all of the Fremen get really upset because for them this is a sacred rite of trial by combat that they know has to end in death, right? So Paul giving him the opportunity to surrender is seen as an insult, right? So all the Fremen kind of get up in arms the first time, and then Stilgar's like, "Hey, calm down. He doesn't know our ways." Right? It's fine, right? And then the second time, I think, or no, it's right before Lady Jessica says he's never killed a man before.
Yeah.
Stilgar goes, "Is he toying with him?"
Because he keeps doing it, and it seems like the Fremen are shocked that he's able to, best him so many times, especially because in the rest of the movie, we've built up the Fremen as such a deadly force of warriors. Like even Duncan Idaho said, when he found them, he fought a Fremen warrior and has never come this close to dying.
Yeah.
So
this is the guy who kills like 6 Sardaukar later in the movie.
Yeah.
And they're supposed to be the best of the best. So like the Fremen are like on another level.
Yeah. So Twinkie little Paul Atreides, Twinkie little Timothée Chalamet,
yes,
easily getting the upper hand on Jamis several times is a big shock to them.
Yeah. And so eventually Paul, he there's some great moments of just the camera on Timothée's face and him doing a pretty decent acting job in this moment, where you kind of see him decide what he's going to do, right? Where he's already seen this prescient path where Jamis is his friend and teaches him stuff, but he's like, I don't see a way out of this other than killing this guy. So I'm going to have to kill this dude. Right. And he does. I like how quick and kind of not flashy it is, right? Because he basically like dodges one of Jamis's attacks and then just stabs him in the back. And he's just instantly dead.
There's a great little moment here that's kind of in slow motion as Paul walks away from the fight, and we see the Fremen all sort of pat him on the back as he's like accepted by them. And Chani, played by Zendaya, who is really good in this movie. She just has like 2
she's
lines,
barely in it. Yeah.
So I can't really comment on her performance,
right.
But she's good.
Yes.
Looking forward to seeing her in part 2.
Yes, there will be a lot more of her in the next one.
Yes. She's looking at him and really seeing him for the first time, and seeing who he really is for the first time. And it's a nice little moment. Yeah. And they
bag up Jamis to get the water out of his corpse.
And Jessica is like, we got to get off world. And Paul says, no, we're staying right here. My road leads into the desert. I've seen the future, And there's we can't talk about the second movie. We can't talk about Paul's journey in the second movie, but there's something really great about how this movie illustrates that as much as Paul is a character controlled by visions and destiny and prescience, he also makes choices.
And I would almost say that the choices that he makes define him even more than someone who doesn't have that prescience, right? Because instead of it being like the future is a foregone conclusion and, he doesn't have any agency, it's like, no, he knows what the consequences of his actions will be.
Yeah.
And he chooses anyway, right? Which in some cases paints him in a positive light, and in others, which we'll especially see if Denis gets to make Dune Messiah, he really don't paint him in a positive light. Just presenting him as kind of this flawed Messiah character in that way is very fascinating. It's one of the things we love about Dune.
Yeah, and I think Timothée Chalamet does a great job of selling these moments towards the end of the film here. Even though his arc isn't totally fulfilled and completed yet, we start seeing the breadcrumbs of that. I'm interested to see how he does in part 2.
Yep.
And this is the end of the movie, basically. We carry Jamas's body through the desert as the sun rises. We get a shot of some dudes riding sandworms.
Yep.
Fuck yeah.
Yep.
And the music and the voices swell. Chani turns to Paul and says, this is only the beginning. And Paul walks on ahead. We get another look from Rebecca Ferguson as she sees her son, sees the man that her son is going to become.
Right.
And the Fremen take off into the desert as the film cuts to black.
Yeah. And that's Dune.
That's Dune. We made it.
We did it. If you are still with us, thank you so much for listening to this long ass episode about Dune. We did the best we could.
We really tried.
We didn't even talk about every scene. There are scenes we did not touch on.
Yeah, there's so many. There's a billion details in this movie that I could talk about. Honestly.
Yeah.
And there's so much to talk about.
We didn't even mention the Hunter Seeker.
We didn't mention the Hunter Seeker at all. We didn't talk about some of the things that were missing from the movie from the book that we wish were in it.
Yeah, there will be a separate episode of this podcast only about the banquet scene from the book. That's not true. Don't hold me to that. We're not actually doing that.
All right, Justus.
Yeah.
Let's do this.
Yeah, let's do it.
Is Dune Part 1 the greatest movie ever made?
David, I'm going to try and keep my verdict short because the episode is already long. That being said, I had a great time with this the first time I watched it, was really blown away, thought it was a very worthy adaptation to a book that I loved very, very much. The second time I watched it, I think it landed even better. It was even better revisiting it, and still plays insanely well at home, which is sort of impressive given that this is really a theater spectacle movie, right? But on my couch, on my moderately sized TV, still really get the grandiosity and the scale of this thing. It still feels very epic, even at home. Second watch bumped it even higher for me, and I was like, this is a masterpiece. Watching it again for the show this week, I think I wasn't as deeply moved by it as I was on the second watch, which I think was my high point with Dune. But that being said, the gripes I have with it are extremely minimal. I think sometimes Timothée Chalamet's performance, like I mentioned earlier, doesn't always totally hit for me. Like sometimes it feels a little too modern and maybe immature in spots. Not immature like in the character. I just feel like he is maybe still growing as an actor. And there's just a few moments where I that sort of hit for me. And then there are also it does. There's also the argument like this feels like half a movie because it is, right? So there is also that element to it where it's like, okay, like a lot of the stuff here in terms of exposition, it's like it feels like we just kind of have to get this out of the way so that we can move on to plot. Also a lot of the plot threads don't feel fully developed or explored. A lot of the character arcs feel like half explored because it literally is, because there's another one of these happening. So all of that to say, right? It's a movie I love. It's a movie that I do still think, even though it played ever so slightly worse for me on this watch than on the last watch, that I do think is a masterpiece. And you know what, David? Dune Part 1, Denis Villeneuve's Dune Part 1. I'm going to go ahead and say it's the greatest movie ever made. It's one of my favorite sci-fi movies, period, that has ever been made. And I'm not as big of a sci-fi head as you are, but I enjoy the genre, and this is one of my all-time faves. David is Dune Part 1, directed by Denis Villeneuve, the greatest movie ever made.
Man, a lot of people said this book was unfilmable.
Yeah.
And I think this movie tries to take the book and distill it into a palatable, pleasing experience for a PG-13 audience. But I don't think it dilutes Frank Herbert's vision in the process. I called this movie a space opera earlier. It is a space opera. And by that, I mean it's an opera in space.
Yeah.
It doesn't dwell on the dialogue for too long. It doesn't dwell on the characters for too long. It casts its brushstrokes in big, beautiful, colorful strokes of grandeur and majesty and emotional intensity with the music, with the visuals, with the beautiful way that this movie is able to tell the nuanced and extremely detailed story of Dune and the Dune universe through just a few words. It is also immaculately paced. It is also half a movie, and we do have to take that into consideration. But I was watching it last night, and I think this movie doesn't have a 3-act structure. I think it has a Shakespearean 5-act structure.
Yes. Okay, so we're back to the Shakespeare
We're
thing.
back to the Shakespeare thing.
Which I'm glad we're
3
back
hours
to.
later.
Well, I'm glad we're back to it, though, because when I was doing my verdict, I finished talking, and then I was like, I forgot to fucking come back on the Shakespeare thing, which I wanted to mention. But I think you're right. I think it's like a 5-act. It is like Henry V.
Yeah.
Right? Is what this movie is structured like. Yeah.
It hits that climactic moment in the middle of the movie with the fall of House Atreides, and everything towards the last hour of the movie is dealing with the fallout from that.
Yes.
It ends on a great moment with the fight between Paul and Jamis, and a great character moment that's going to set Paul on the path for the future. It's so beautiful and emotional and evocative, and like I said, just steeped in grandeur and majesty on the highest level. I haven't seen another movie like this except for the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and I truly don't mean that hyperbolically.
No, I think
and
that's
I don't
a good
say
analog.
that lightly.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful, it's incredible, and you know what? I probably would have said this even if the second one wasn't coming out.
Yeah.
I think if we only had Dune Part 1 and we never had Dune Part 2 because it never got greenlit or whatever, I would still watch the fuck out of this movie.
Yeah, I agree. And I would be heartbroken about the unfinished story.
But overall, I'd be satisfied with what this movie does because, Justice, I think Dune Part 1's the greatest movie ever made.
Yep, there it is. We sort of both knew that this is where this was going. But I mean, we fucking love this movie.
Before we finish, I do want to mention, like, there have been a lot of criticisms about the casting in this movie being slightly whitewashed, and I do think there are plenty of people who have their reasons for that, and I think that's a totally valid opinion to have.
Yeah, I think it's a legitimate gripe to have with this movie.
And it's a gripe I have with the movie as well.
Yeah.
But when I'm watching it, I'm not necessarily thinking about that. I'm not thinking about the scenes that aren't in the book, that are from the book that aren't in this movie. I'm not thinking about some of the minor problems that this movie has. I'm just having a great time watching this movie.
Yeah,
So,
and to be clear, like the cast isn't entirely white, right?
Yes.
There are just some white actors in roles where maybe due to the Arabic cultural influence that is very present in the world of those characters, that maybe it would have made sense to have an Arab actor in that role.
Yes.
Right? Like that's mostly what people have a complaint with, right? Because there are a lot of fantastic actors of color in this movie giving great performances. In terms of Hollywood whitewashing, it is not an egregiously problematic example, but it is maybe like, okay, I love Javier Bardem as Stilgar, but like, maybe there's an Arab actor who could have done that just as good.
And the Arabic and the Muslim influences in the book
Yeah.
are controversial, to say the least.
Right.
And I'm interested to see how Denis handles that in the second movie.
Yeah.
Because they come into play a lot more in the second half of the film.
Yeah.
So not a criticism that I have that I hold really true to heart.
Yeah.
It is a gripe that I have with the movie, but I would be remiss if I didn't bring that up
Yeah.
before we close the episode.
Yes, thank you for acknowledging that, because it is something that I had intended to mention as well. Because like not a huge problem with the movie, but like just indicative of the problems that still persist in Hollywood in terms of like racial equity on screen.
Yeah. So that's Dune Part 1, the greatest movie ever made.
That's right.
Talk about the show, tweet about the show, tell your friends about the show. We love the support. We love you very much. And Justice?
Yeah.
What are we talking about next week?
Next week, we're keeping the Dune train rolling, baby, because you know what comes out this week and what we are going to see at an advanced screening tomorrow is Dune Part 2, baby. We're gonna be talking Dune Part 2 next week on the show.
Full spoilers.
Following the release. Full spoilers.
So come back after you've seen it.
Yep.
Full spoilers. We're going to get deep into it. It's probably going to be a little bit looser than other episodes.
Yeah, because
we can't take notes in a movie theater.
Right. We'll only be able to watch this in the movie theater. So yeah, don't expect the rigorous play-by-play that you normally get from us. It's going to be our first time covering a new release. That's probably not something we will do often, but this is such a huge event for David and I that we felt like we had to jump on this one immediately.
Yeah. We couldn't like do an episode tied into the release of Dune Part 2 and just talk about the first movie and the next week fucking talk about Friday the 13th Part 4 or something.
Yeah.
So yes, we will be keeping the train going, so we hope that you hop on the sandworm with us next week for Dune Part 2.
The spice must flow and the pods must too.
Until then, we love you so much, and as always,
later
dipshits.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of The Greatest Movie Ever Made. Please remember to leave us a rating and a review, and to subscribe to the show wherever you listen. We appreciate you supporting the show and spreading the word. Tell your friends to listen, tell your enemies to listen, tell your mom to listen. If your neighbor has an unsecured Bluetooth speaker, connect to it and play an episode. You can follow us on social media at TGMEM_podcast. And if you've got a movie that you want us to talk about, send us an email at thegreatestmoviepodcast@gmail.com.